Hey guys and welcome back to my channel. This is part 7 of What If Naruto was in Code Geass. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and also go and support the author, link in description. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked at Zero and the Black Knights standing in his office. Whatever traces of sleep had been on his face moments ago were gone now, replaced by a sharp, guarded focus. His gaze swept over the group once before settling back on the masked man at their center. And what, pray tell, is there to talk about? Naruto asked coolly, his voice carrying none of the easy warmth he usually showed. He leaned back slightly in his chair, though there was nothing relaxed about him. As far as I know, neither my father nor I have any interest in working with terrorists. Tamaki bristled at that immediately. Watch your mouth, bastard. Zero lifted a hand slightly, silencing him before he could continue. A harsh label, Zero said evenly, though not an unexpected one. Naruto gave a humorless smile. You broke into my company in the middle of the night with armed men. If you were hoping for a warmer reception, your approach could use work. That is fair, Zero admitted without missing a beat. But I think you know well enough that people like me rarely have the luxury of arranging proper appointments. Naruto's eyes remained fixed on him. People like you usually don't get appointments. There was a beat of silence. Then Zero took another step forward, measured and controlled. I didn't come here to trade insults. I came because the situation in Area 11 is changing rapidly. Britannia is tightening its grip, Cornelia is becoming more aggressive, and the number of people who will suffer under that pressure will only continue to grow. Naruto's expression did not soften. And you think that justifies what you've done? No, Zero said. I think it explains why I'm here. Naruto let out a quiet breath through his nose, his fingers tapping once against the arm of his chair. That doesn't answer my question. Zero inclined his head slightly. Then I'll be direct. The Black Knights need support. Financial, medical, logistical. Support that the Namikaze Corporation is uniquely positioned to provide. Naruto stared at him for a long moment before giving a short, disbelieving laugh. You really did just break into my office to ask me for money. Tamaki looked offended by the phrasing, but Zero remained composed. Not simply money. Naruto stood then, slowly, planting both hands on the desk as he leaned forward just enough to make the movement feel deliberate rather than aggressive. Let me save you some time, he said, the edge in his voice sharpening. My company helps people. We rebuild neighborhoods. We provide medical supplies. We keep civilians alive. What we do not do is bankroll masked extremists who think blowing things up counts as justice. The words hung in the air. Zero did not look away. Even if those extremists are the only reason many of those same civilians still have any hope at all. Naruto's eyes flashed. Hope. He repeated. Is that what you call Narita? That landed. The room went still, the atmosphere tightening at once. Even Tamaki, for once, did not immediately run his mouth. Zero's voice, when it came, was lower. Narita was a battlefield. And people died, Naruto shot back. A lot of them. Zero said nothing. Naruto straightened, folding his arms across his chest now, his stare unyielding. So no. There's nothing to discuss. Because if you came here expecting me to pretend I don't know what you are, or what you've done, then you wasted your trip. For the first time, Zero's posture shifted by the barest amount, not uncertainty, but recalculation. I didn't come expecting trust, he said. Only practicality. Naruto arched a brow. You're going to try and appeal to my practical side after breaking into my office. If I had approached you openly, Zero replied, you would have refused to even hear me out. Naruto held his gaze. You're hearing yourself right now, aren't you? That nearly drew a smirk from CC, though she wisely kept quiet. Zero let the jab pass. Whether you approve of the Black Knights or not, the reality remains the same. Britannia is escalating. The situation will worsen. More people will be displaced. More will be injured. More will die. If that happens, your corporation will be forced to carry even more of the burden. Naruto's expression did not change, but he did not interrupt. Seeing that, Zero pressed on. I am not asking you to manufacture weapons. I'm not asking you to publicly endorse us. I am asking you to consider the possibility that there are ways to help without openly involving yourself. Naruto stared at him in silence, weighing every word. And why? He asked at last, would I even consider doing that? Zero answered without hesitation. Because for all your moral objections, you know as well as I do that Britannia will not be changed by charity alone. The words struck harder than the previous ones had. Naruto's eyes narrowed further, but this time there was no instant response. Zero continued, voice steady. You can save lives, Naruto Namikaze. You already do. But if the system that keeps destroying those lives remains untouched, then all you are really doing is treating the symptoms while the disease spreads. Naruto's jaw tightened. A long silence followed. Then, very calmly, Naruto asked, are you done? Zero paused. For the moment. Good. Naruto moved around the desk. The shift was subtle, but the room instantly felt more dangerous. Then let me be direct too, Naruto said, stopping a few feet from Zero. I don't work with threats. I don't work with people who force their way into my company. And I definitely don't work with people who think I'll just hand over support because they gave me a speech about the world being broken. Tamaki scoffed. You talk big for someone sitting up here while others do the fighting. Naruto's head turned slightly toward him. When he spoke, his tone was almost conversational. That the smartest thing you could come up with. Tamaki stiffened. Zero cut in before the exchange could deteriorate further. Enough. Naruto looked back at Zero. I'm not saying you're wrong about everything, Naruto said. Britannia is rotten. The system is rotten. But if you think that means I'm just going to help you because your enemy happens to be my enemy too, then you really don't understand me. Zero was silent. Naruto took another step closer, close enough now that there was no desk between them, no furniture, nothing but open space and tension. You came here because you need something, Naruto said. That means right now, you don't have leverage. You have a request. A pause. So ask properly. That drew the attention of everyone in the room. Zero stared at Naruto through the mask, understanding immediately that this was not a refusal. Not yet. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, only slightly, but enough. Very well, Zero said. Then I am asking. Naruto watched him for another moment, unreadable. Then he said, no. Naruto stared at Zero in cold silence, the tension in the office stretched so tight it felt ready to snap. And if any of you think I'm going to be manipulated into helping you by guilt, threats, or half-truths, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on Zero, you can leave now. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Colin moved. Wait. The single word made everyone look at her. Colin's hands were clenched tightly at her sides, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone in the room could hear it. For a second, she almost backed down. Almost let Zero keep talking. Almost let the night play out however it was going to. But she couldn't. Not like this. Not with Naruto looking at all of them like strangers. Not with him standing there asking for honesty while she kept the biggest truth from him. Colin stepped out from Zero's side. Colin. Tamaki said, confused. She ignored him. Her eyes stayed on Naruto. There's something I need to tell you, she said, her voice low at first, then stronger. Something I should have told you before. Naruto frowned slightly, wary now for a different reason. Colin took another step forward. I'm not here because Zero ordered me to come, she said. Or, not just because of that. Zero said nothing, though beneath the mask Lelouch's expression tightened. He had wanted Colin's help, not this. Colin drew in a breath, then raised a hand to her visor. Naruto watched her without speaking. Slowly, Colin removed her visor. Her face was fully visible now. And Naruto stared at her like the sight itself had struck him. Colin. Colin swallowed, but did not look away. Yes, I'm one of them, she repeated. I've been fighting with them for a while now. I'm not just connected to them, or sympathetic to what they do. Her voice shook slightly near the end, but she forced it steady. I'm part of them. Naruto stared at her in open shock now, his body gone completely still. He started, then stopped, like his mind refused to complete the thought. You're serious? Colin nodded once. Yes. Naruto let out a short, disbelieving breath and took a half step back. All this time? He asked, his voice quieter now, more stunned than angry. You were. Yes. Naruto looked away for a second, jaw tight, then back at her. He looked almost offended by how blindsided he was. In truth, he wasn't blindsided as he knew since Shinjuku, but somehow this hurt more than he realized. You. He said again, like the word alone couldn't possibly carry enough disbelief. You're a Black Knight. Colin flinched, but pressed on. I wanted to tell you, she said. More than once. She clenched her fists harder. I didn't know how. Naruto laughed once, though there was no humor in it. So what, all those times we talked. Drove around. Ate together. You were just keeping this from me the whole time. Colin's face tightened. Yes. That answer hurt more than if she had tried to dodge it. Naruto looked at her for a long moment, saying nothing. Then Colin took the final step. If zero asking isn't enough, she said quietly, then I am. Everyone in the room froze. Even CC looked more closely at her now. Colin's eyes did not leave Naruto's. If I asked you, she said, voice trembling now despite herself, would you do it for me? The question landed even harder than her confession had. Naruto's eyes widened slightly. Colin. I know what I'm asking, she said quickly. And I know I don't really have the right to ask it after lying to you. But I'm asking anyway. Her breathing was uneven now, but she kept going. Because this matters to me. Because what we're doing matters to me. Because Japan matters to me. And because, she hesitated, then forced the words out. Because you matter to me too, and I need to know if any of that means enough for you to hear me out. Naruto just stared at her. This time, when he looked shocked, it was total and unguarded. At the fact that she had put herself in front of all of them and said it. Zero remained perfectly still, though inside Lelouch was recalculating everything. This was not what he had planned. This was far more dangerous. And, possibly, far more effective. Naruto finally found his voice again. You're seriously asking me that right now? He said, almost in disbelief. Colin nodded once. Yes. With them standing here. Yes. After telling me you've been lying to me this whole time. A tiny pause. Yes. Naruto dragged a hand down his face and turned away for a second, trying to gather himself. When he looked back, the shock had not fully left him. You really know how to drop something on a guy, he muttered. Colin almost smiled, but couldn't quite manage it. Naruto looked at Zero, then CC, then Tamaki, and finally back to Colin. You picked one hell of a time to be honest. I know. Another silence settled over the room. Then Naruto exhaled slowly. I'm not saying yes, he said. Colin's expression fell, but he kept going. But, Naruto's eyes locked on hers. I'm not throwing all of you out either. That was enough to make Zero straighten slightly. Naruto held up a hand before anyone could speak. This is not because he asked, he said, tilting his head toward Zero. And it's not because you put me on the spot. His voice hardened. It's because I want to hear exactly what you've gotten yourself into. Colin took that blow without complaint. Naruto looked at Zero next. So here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to sit down. You're going to explain everything clearly. No speeches, no riddles, no revolutionary drama. His expression sharpened. And if I hear one answer I don't like, this meeting is over. Then he looked back at Colin, still visibly shaken by what she had revealed. And you, he said, quieter now, are going to explain yourself too. Colin nodded. I will. Naruto studied her for one more second, still acting like he could hardly believe what he was hearing. Then, with a tired gesture, he motioned toward the seating area in his office. Sit down, he said. All of you. And this time, when Zero moved to speak, it was not as an intruder forcing his way forward, but as someone who had, at least for the moment, been allowed to stay. Mito let out a soft sigh as she stepped through the front entrance of the Namikaze Corporation building, one hand resting lightly on her hip. Naruto was overworking himself again. She knew it. Kushina knew it. And, judging by the way Kushina had practically shoved the issue into her lap earlier with her phone call with her mother, Kushina was more than a little worried about it too. Go check on him, Kushina had said, arms folded, an expression full of motherly concern. He says he's fine, which means he's probably not fine. Mito had not argued much. There was no point. She had seen the same signs herself over the past few days, Naruto disappearing for hours at a time, sleeping too little, eating irregularly, and carrying that stubborn look he always got when he was trying to do everything on his own. So she had come to drag him away from his desk if necessary. As she entered, she gave the security personnel at the front a small nod. They greeted her politely enough, but almost immediately Mito noticed that something was off. The two men looked tense. Mito slowed. Good evening, she said evenly. Good evening, Miss Mito, one of the guards replied a touch too quickly. Mito's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained otherwise pleasant. Naruto's still here, right? The guards exchanged the briefest glance. That was enough to sharpen her attention completely. Yes, miss, the other one said. Naruto-sama is currently in a meeting with an important client and should not be disturbed. Mito blinked. At this hour? Yes, miss. That by itself was strange. Naruto did meet with people late sometimes, especially now that Minato and Kushina were abroad and he had been left handling more than usual. But the phrasing was wrong. The stiffness was wrong. And more than anything, the guards sounded like they were repeating something rather than speaking naturally. Mito tilted her head slightly. An important client, she repeated. Yes, miss. And he told you personally not to let anyone in. Another tiny hesitation. Yes, miss. Mito stared at them for a long second. Her expression softened into something almost amused, but her eyes stayed sharp. I see, she said. Outwardly, she remained calm. Inside, alarm bells were starting to ring. Because Naruto hated using the phrase important client unless he was being deliberately formal or unless someone else had told people to describe it that way. And if Kushina was right and Naruto was already pushing himself too hard, then the last thing Mito believed was that he would willingly shut everyone out for some vague midnight business meeting without at least saying something to her first. Something was definitely going on. And she intended to find out what. Naruto's phone vibrated sharply in his hand. He glanced at the screen, saw that the call was coming from one of the night security staff downstairs, and answered immediately. What is it? The guard on the other end sounded tense. Sir, your sister is here. Naruto's expression hardened at once. What? She says she needs to see you, the guard continued carefully. We've stopped her at the lower access point, but she's refusing to leave without speaking to you. Across the room, Zero went very still. Naruto closed his eyes for a brief second and exhaled through his nose, irritation and concern mixing together almost immediately. Of course she is, he muttered. Then his gaze lifted and found Zero already watching him. The masked revolutionary spoke before Naruto could say anything else. She needs to leave, Zero said, his voice low and controlled. Now. The room went tighter somehow. Colin looked sharply toward Zero. Tamaki frowned. CC. Remained silent, but her eyes narrowed slightly. Naruto's own expression cooled. You think I don't know that? Zero took one measured step forward. If she stays, she becomes a liability. His tone sharpened, just enough. Get rid of her. Or I will. That made Colin go rigid. Naruto's eyes locked onto Zero's mask. For one brief moment, the office felt dangerous in a way that had nothing to do with guns or numbers or Britannia. Just two people staring at each other, both measuring exactly how far the other one was willing to go. Naruto knew perfectly well Lelouch would never actually hurt Mito. But he let none of that show. Instead, he gave Zero a flat, unreadable look and said, You really know how to make a request sound like a threat. Zero didn't answer. Naruto looked back down at the phone. Keep her there, he told the guard. Don't let her come up yet. Yes, sir. The line stayed open for half a second longer before Naruto ended the call. Then he immediately tapped Mito's number and switched the phone to speaker. It rang once. Naruto. Mito answered right away. Yeah, he said. Go home. There was a pause on the other end. That's it? She asked. No explanation. I'm busy. With your important client? She asked, and even through the phone it was obvious she didn't believe that for a second. Naruto's eyes flicked briefly across the room, then, very deliberately, toward Colin. I'm with Colin, he said. That got a reaction out of almost everyone. Colin's head snapped toward him. Tamaki looked openly confused. CC raised one brow. And beneath Zero's mask, Lelouch became even more tense than before. Because Mito being here was already a problem. Mito staying long enough to push would be worse. On the other end of the line, Mito went silent for exactly 1 second. Then, in a tone that was only half joking, she said, well, if you and Colin are about to have sex, be sure to use protection. Colin went red so fast it was almost impressive. Mito. She choked out, horrified. Don't say that. Tamaki actually coughed. Naruto's face went blank with disbelief. What the hell is wrong with you? From the phone came Mito's completely unapologetic voice. What? I'm trying to be responsible. You are not helping. Colin looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow her. Why would you say that when I'm clearly on speaker? Naruto yelled into the phone. Mito let out a soft hum, as if considering it. Ah. So it was on speaker. That explains a lot. Colin made a strangled sound that might have been a protest or the beginning of actual death. Naruto dragged a hand down his face. Mito. Just go home. Seriously. This time the pause lasted longer. When she spoke again, her voice was lighter on the surface, but only just. All right, she said. I'll go. Naruto's shoulders eased a fraction. Good. But Naruto. He frowned. What? Be careful. Naruto's expression shifted, only slightly. Yeah, he said. I will. Okay. Her voice softened. Night. The line clicked dead. Naruto lowered the phone and stared at it for a second before muttering, unbelievable. Colin was still red from neck to ears and refusing to look at anyone. I'm going to kill her, she muttered. That makes 2 of us, Naruto said automatically. But beneath the embarrassment, both of them understood what had really just happened. Mito had known something was wrong. She had not believed the excuse. And she had still played along. Because she trusted Naruto to handle it. Or at least trusted him enough to leave without making things worse. Naruto put the phone away and lifted his eyes back to Zero. All right, he said, his voice steady again. You've got my attention. His expression hardened. Don't waste it. Euphemia sat quietly at dinner, her fork moving more out of habit than appetite as her thoughts remained fixed on the same problem that had been circling in her mind all evening. A personal night. It was not a title she could hand out lightly, not when whoever she chose would in many ways become an extension of herself. Their actions, their judgment, their loyalties, everything would reflect back on her. The more she thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Across from her, Cornelia noticed the distant look in her sister's eyes almost immediately. You do not need to decide so quickly, Yuffie, Cornelia said, her tone gentler than it would have been with anyone else. There is no need to rush something like this. Euphemia blinked and looked up from her plate. I know, she said softly. It just feels like such an important choice. It is, Cornelia agreed. Which is precisely why you should take your time. Euphemia gave her sister a small, grateful smile, though the uncertainty did not fully leave her face. Their quiet dinner was interrupted a moment later when the door opened and Darlton entered the room. Cornelia's eyes shifted to him at once, her expression cooling back into that of the viceroy. Darlton, she said. Why are you here? Darlton bowed his head briefly. Your Highness. We've received a report from the local police. That was enough to sharpen Cornelia's full attention. And they reported what appeared to be members of the Black Knights near the Namikaze Corporation building. Cornelia's gaze hardened instantly. Was Zero sighted? Darlton straightened slightly. It is unknown at this time. The report was unclear on that point. Cornelia frowned, clearly displeased by the uncertainty. Beside her, Euphemia's eyes widened in concern. Naruto, she murmured under her breath, then looked quickly to her sister. Cornelia, please. You should investigate anyway. Cornelia turned toward her younger sister, immediately catching the worry in her voice. You're concerned for Naruto Namikaze. Euphemia did not deny it. If the Black Knights were really near the company building, then there could be danger there whether Zero was present or not. Cornelia considered that for only a moment before giving Darlton a slight nod. Very well. Dispatch men to confirm the report immediately. And if the Black Knights are still in the area, I want them apprehended. Yes, Your Highness, Darlton said at once. As he turned to leave and carry out the order, Euphemia lowered her gaze briefly, her hands tightening in her lap. She could only hope they were not already too late. Colin's fingers tightened at her sides before she finally looked toward Zero. I need a moment alone with him, she said quietly. Please. The request changed the mood in the room immediately. Tamaki looked ready to object out of sheer habit, but Zero lifted a hand before he could speak. Behind the mask, Lelouch studied Colin for a moment, then gave a single, reluctant nod. Very well, Zero said. We'll step outside. Naruto said nothing as Zero turned and led the others out of the office. CC. Gave Colin a long, unreadable look before following. Tamaki muttered something under his breath, but he moved when Zero did. A second later, the door shut, leaving only Colin and Naruto alone. Out in the hall, Lelouch stood rigidly still. He had agreed because forcing himself into the conversation would only make Naruto dig in harder. Colin had a better chance of reaching him now than Zero ever would. Even so, tension had settled deep in his chest and refused to ease. If this dragged on much longer, if Naruto stayed unmoved, he might have to use Geass on him. The thought sat like poison in his stomach. He didn't want to do that. Not to Naruto. Not to someone who had once belonged to that small, fragile circle of people that had almost felt like family. But if the Black Knights were going to survive, if Nunnally was going to be protected, then sentiment could not be allowed to destroy necessity. Even if he hated himself for thinking it. Inside the office, Colin stood in silence for a moment, suddenly unsure how to begin now that the others were gone. Naruto watched her with his arms folded, expression guarded. Finally, Colin forced herself to speak. Are you mad at me? Naruto let out a quiet breath through his nose and looked away for a second before answering. Yeah, he said honestly. A little. Colin lowered her eyes. Naruto's voice softened, though only slightly. Not because of the Black Knights by themselves. I get it. I understand why someone would fight Britannia. I'm not stupid, Colin. He looked back at her, and the hurt on his face was impossible to miss. But I'd be lying if I said this didn't hurt. Colin's throat tightened. Naruto stepped closer, though not enough to crowd her. I need to ask you something, he said. And I want the truth. Colin nodded once. Naruto held her gaze. Were your feelings for me real? She flinched. He kept going, because now that the question was out, he couldn't stop. Or was I just convenient? He asked quietly. A way to get close to me. To the company. To make this easier when the time came. The words struck hard, and Colin's face changed at once. For one awful instant, all she could hear was her stepmother's voice. Following in your mother's footsteps, tying yourself to a wealthy man, at least you're doing that right. Colin's head snapped up. No, she said again, stepping toward him now, her eyes bright with anger and hurt. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. Naruto blinked, caught off guard by the force of it. I never got close to you because of your money, Colin said, voice trembling. I never wanted to use you. I never wanted to drag you into any of this. She clenched her fists. If anything, that's why I kept it from you. Because I knew the second you found out, this, she gestured helplessly between them, would turn into something ugly. Naruto stayed quiet, letting her speak. A part of me wanted to tell you, Colin admitted more softly. More than once. I wanted to trust you with it. I wanted, she stopped herself, breath catching. I wanted you to know me. I wanted you to understand me. I wanted to say I love you. The words rose right to the surface and died there. Because the moment she thought them, another thought came with them just as hard. What right do I have to say that now? What right do I have to say I love you when I'm the one standing here, part of this? Colin looked away. When I'm with you, she said instead, forcing the words out carefully, that part is real. All of it. The time we spent together. What I felt. What I still. She cut herself off again and drew in a shaky breath. None of that was fake. Naruto stared at her for a long moment. Then some of the tension went out of his shoulders. I believe you, he said quietly. Colin looked up, startled. Naruto gave a faint, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I'm still hurt, he admitted. But I believe you. For the first time since she had revealed herself, Colin looked like she might actually cry. Naruto noticed and looked away first, giving her that small bit of dignity. After a few seconds, Colin found her voice again. Then, would you do it? She asked carefully. For me. Naruto closed his eyes for a moment. When he answered, his voice was gentle, but firm. No. That hit her harder than if he had snapped it out. Naruto opened his eyes again. Colin, I understand why you fight. I understand why this matters to you. And I'm not turning my back on you because of it. He took a breath. But I'm not going to work with Zero. Colin's face fell, though she tried to hide it. Naruto shook his head. Not like this. Not after he broke into my office with armed people. Not after Narita. His expression hardened. And not because you asked me while standing in the middle of something that was clearly meant to pressure me. Colin dropped her gaze. But, Naruto continued, that doesn't mean I'm done listening. If you need help, that's different. If civilians need help, that's different. If people are starving or bleeding or stuck in the middle of all this, I'm not going to ignore that. He stepped closer again, enough to make sure she had to hear him. But I'm not giving Zero my support. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Colin nodded slowly, even if the answer hurt. Okay. Naruto studied her for a second, then added more softly, I'm not rejecting you, Colin. I'm rejecting him. That almost made it worse. Because somehow it was kinder than she deserved. Colin let out a shaky breath and gave a small nod. I know. Silence settled between them again, quieter now, sadder. Then Naruto asked, are you alright? Colin laughed once under her breath, though there was no humor in it. Not really. Naruto's expression softened. Yeah, he said. Me neither. And for a moment, with Zero and the others waiting outside and too many secrets hanging between them, that was the closest thing either of them could offer the other as comfort. Lelouch had not meant to listen. But once the door had shut, it had become impossible not to hear parts of it through the tense silence of the hallway. He heard Colin ask if Naruto was angry. He heard Naruto admit that he was hurt. He heard the question that mattered most, whether her feelings had ever been real and Colin's immediate, furious denial that she had ever used him. And then he heard the answer that made his stomach tighten. Naruto would not work with Zero. Not now. Maybe not ever. Lelouch closed his eyes for the briefest second behind the mask. So that was that. He was still deciding what to do with that when the communicator at his side crackled. Zero. It was Inoue. Lelouch straightened at once and pressed a hand to the receiver. What is it? There are military units moving in, Inoue said, her voice low and quick through the radio. Searchlights just swept the upper floors, and a patrol cars already arrived below. More response is coming. Lelouch's eyes widened behind the mask. He had been careful. The timing had been controlled. The guards had been handled. There shouldn't have been enough time for Britannian forces to respond unless. Then his mind jumped to the only answer that mattered. It didn't matter how. They were here. How close? Zero asked sharply. Too close, Inoue replied. If we wait much longer, we'll be boxed in. Zero's jaw tightened. Pull everyone out, he ordered immediately. We rendezvous at the fallback point. Understood. Without another word, Zero pushed the office door open and stepped inside. He stopped dead for half a heartbeat. Naruto was kissing Colin. Not a desperate kiss. Not an accident. A real one, close, warm, and quiet enough that it made the entire room feel different for that single stunned moment. CC, stepping in just behind Zero, saw it too. And to her own irritation, something sharp and unpleasant twisted in her chest at the sight. Jealousy, she realized a second later with quiet annoyance. Not entirely of Naruto. Not entirely of Colin. But of how simple this moment looked for them, how openly it existed. Zero recovered first. Colin. His voice cut through the moment like a blade. Naruto and Colin broke apart at once and turned toward him. Zero did not waste a second. We're out of time. The military is moving in. He looked directly at Colin. Go. Help Tamaki get out. Colin's face tightened. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to refuse. Then duty won. She gave one reluctant nod, let her fingers slip from Naruto's sleeve, and moved past Zero without another word. CC watched her go, then turned her attention back to Naruto. The room felt very different now. Very still. Zero stepped fully inside and faced Naruto once more. Well, he asked. Your answer. Naruto looked at him steadily, all the warmth that had been in his face moments earlier gone again. No. There was no hesitation in it. No apology. Just refusal. Zero held his gaze for one long second. That, he said quietly, is too bad. Then he lifted his head and activated his Geass. The sigil flared in his eye as he locked onto Naruto's gaze. Have the Namikaze Corporation assist the Black Knights by any means necessary. The command fell into the room with absolute force. And Naruto answered, clear and immediate. No. I won't help you, Zero. Silence. Lelouch went perfectly still. For one stunned second, he could not process what had just happened. His Geass had been used properly. Eye contact had been established. The command had been direct. And it had failed. Naruto was still standing there. Still himself. Still refusing. Behind the mask, Lelouch's thoughts collided violently. Why didn't it work? That should have been impossible. Before he could test it, before he could say anything else, the building outside roared with the sound of searchlights sweeping past the windows and engines shifting into position. Time was gone. Lelouch stared at Naruto for one more second, shaken by the failure, by the impossibility of it, and by the fact that he had no answer for it. Then he forced himself to turn away. As he stepped back toward the door, he said, low and cold, this isn't over, Namikaze. Then Zero and the others were gone, retreating in a rush of footsteps and tension, leaving Naruto alone in the office with only one thought burning in the back of Lelouch's mind as he fled. Why didn't my Geass work on him? Above the Namikaze Corporation building, searchlights from a military helicopter swept across the upper floors and surrounding rooftops as it banked into position. For a few tense seconds, the pilots saw nothing but concrete, glass, and shadow. Then one of them caught movement. There. The co-pilot shouted into his headset. Target sighted. Zero is near the upper executive floor. The report crackled through the comms network instantly. On the ground below, Cornelia's eyes narrowed at once, fury flashing across her features. Zero. She turned sharply toward the two men nearest her. Guilford. Darlton. Surround the building. No one gets in or out without my order. Her tone turned even colder. I want every exit covered. At once, Your Highness, Guilford answered. Darlton gave a sharp nod. It will be done. Orders moved through Britannia's forces immediately. Nightmares shifted into position. Infantry spread outward. The perimeter around the Namikaze Corporation tightened by the second. Cornelia kept her eyes fixed on the building, jaw set. This time, she said quietly, almost to herself, you won't slip away from me. Nearby, Euphemia had gone pale. Her hands tightened together in front of her as she looked up at the tower, worry growing with every shouted order and every new unit moving into place. If Zero was really inside the building, then Naruto was too. And if the military was about to close in on the company with armed troops and nightmares surrounding it on every side. Cornelia, Euphemia said, unable to keep the strain from her voice, Naruto is still in there. Cornelia did not look away from the building. I'm aware. But that did nothing to ease Euphemia's fear. She kept staring upward, heart pounding harder with every passing second. All she could do was hope Naruto was still safe. Or at least that he would remain safe once Cornelia's forces made their move. Tamaki took one look through the glass at the tightening Britannian perimeter below and went pale. We are so screwed, he said flatly. Outside, nightmares were moving into position while police vehicles and infantry boxed in the Namikaze Corporation from every side. Above them, the helicopter kept circling, its searchlight sweeping across the upper floors. Zero stood still for only a second. Then his gaze shifted across the office and caught on something just beyond Naruto's desk. A panel. Concealed well enough that most people would have missed it, but not well enough to escape someone already looking for a way out. There, Zero said sharply. Elevator. Move. Colin, Tamaki, and CC didn't waste time asking questions. The last thing any of them needed was to be trapped on the executive floor when Cornelia's forces came crashing in. Zero moved first, quickly accessing the hidden controls. A second later, the panel slid back and the doors opened. They stepped inside at once. Down, Zero ordered. The elevator descended far deeper than any of them expected. When the doors finally opened, the four of them stepped out into silence and stopped. The hidden lab spread out before them, larger than any of them had imagined. Rows of monitors glowed softly in the dimness, casting cold light over work tables, sealed chambers, suspended machinery, and equipment none of them could identify at a glance. It did not feel like part of a corporation. It felt like something that had been buried on purpose. Tamaki slowly turned in place, his eyes wide. What the hell is all this? Even Colin looked momentarily stunned. CC said nothing, but her eyes moved across the room with quiet interest. Zero stepped farther in, gaze moving rapidly over the screens and machinery. Whatever this was, it was far beyond anything the Namikaze Corporation publicly admitted to developing. Then one particular monitor caught his eye. He moved toward it immediately. Displayed on the screen was the schematic for a nightmare core. Except the title across the top read, Core Radiance. Lelouch's eyes narrowed behind the mask as he scanned the data. Projected energy output. Efficiency models. Power generation estimates. Then he saw the number that made him go completely still. 5,000%, he murmured. Colin came up beside him and read over the display as well. For a second, she honestly thought she had read it wrong. The projected output dwarfed the standard cores used in Britannian nightmares to such an absurd degree that it bordered on fiction. What kind of machine could even handle that? She asked under her breath. Zero didn't answer. His mind was already racing ahead. A core like this would change nightmare warfare overnight. It would make the Lancelot, the Gurren, even Cornelia's upgraded Gloucester look obsolete. And if Minato or Naruto had access to something like this, then the Namikaze Corporation was hiding far more than he had imagined. Zero. Tamaki's voice came from deeper in the lab. The others turned and saw them. Two nightmares stood in reinforced storage bays farther back. The first was the Izanami, sleek and severe, its frame carrying a cold, almost regal menace even while dormant. The second made Colin's breath catch. The Izanagi. For one long heartbeat, none of them said anything. Then Zero stepped forward slowly, staring up at it. Why, he said quietly, does Minato Namikaze have Madara's nightmare? Colin was wondering the exact same thing. The Izanagi stood there in silence, dormant and imposing, and for the first time since entering the lab, something uneasy twisted in her chest. Her thoughts spun for only a second before she shoved them aside. We need to keep moving, Colin said sharply. That snapped the others back into motion. CC turned away from the two stored frames and moved farther along the rear wall until she spotted a partially concealed maintenance access point. There, she said. Service tunnel. Tamaki looked from the tunnel back to the nightmares and frowned like the whole situation was personally insulting him. Why can't we just steal those? He demanded. If we've got Madara's machine and the other one, we could blast our way out. Zero didn't even look at him. Because if they're locked, we waste time. And if they aren't, we still don't know their operating parameters. His tone sharpened. Either way, we are not experimenting while Cornelia closes in above us. Tamaki grimaced, but that was enough to shut him up. Colin gave the two machines one last wary look. Still, she said quietly, almost to herself, why are they even here? The Namikaze Corporation isn't supposed to be developing weapons. Zero lingered for one final second, his gaze shifting from the Izanagi to the core radiance display and then across the rest of the lab. The implications of what he had just seen were enormous. But there was no time to dwell on any of it. Move, he ordered. One by one, they slipped into the service tunnel and disappeared into the dark beneath the Namikaze Corporation, vanishing into the hidden arteries of the building while above them Cornelia's forces closed in too late to catch them. A Britannian soldier burst through the emergency exit stairwell door first, rifle raised and eyes sweeping across the executive office. Clear, he shouted. A second later, Cornelia entered at a brisk pace, her expression hard and focused, with Euphemia right behind her despite the fear plainly visible on her face. Cornelia had argued that Euphi should have remained at the palace, or at the very least downstairs under guard, but her younger sister had refused outright. The moment she heard that the Black Knights had been inside Naruto's office, concern for him had overridden everything else. As soon as the two princesses stepped fully into the room, they saw him. Naruto stood near his desk, visibly shaken, the aftermath of the confrontation still lingering in his posture, but otherwise seemingly unharmed. Naruto! Euphemia cried out his name and ran to him before either he or Cornelia could react. She threw herself into his arms so suddenly that Naruto barely had time to catch her. Even Cornelia stopped short, clearly startled by the open display, while Naruto himself blinked in surprise as the pink-haired princess buried her face against his chest and began to cry. Yuffie, Naruto started, caught off guard. I was so worried, Euphemia said into his shirt, her voice trembling. When they said Zero was here, and that the Black Knights were in the building. Naruto's expression softened immediately. Awkwardly at first, then more gently, he wrapped an arm around her and tried to soothe her. I'm all right, he said quietly. Really? I'm okay. Euphemia clung to him for another few seconds before finally pulling back, wiping quickly at her eyes while trying to regain some semblance of composure. Cornelia, who had allowed the moment to pass only because Naruto was plainly unharmed and Yuffie needed the reassurance, stepped forward at once. Where is Zero? She demanded. Naruto looked at her evenly. I don't know. Cornelia's eyes narrowed. Naruto continued before she could accuse him of withholding information. If I had to guess, they escaped through one of the service tunnels the company uses to transport goods. That much was true. He simply left out the elevator. And the hidden lab. Cornelia stared at him for a moment, clearly weighing whether she believed him, before moving on. What did Zero want? And how did he get past your security? The answer to the second question. Naruto said. I honestly don't know. That, too, was true, at least in the strictest sense. As for what he wanted, Naruto went on, he was trying to recruit me. Or more specifically, he wanted the Namikaze Corporation helping the Black Knights. That made Cornelia's expression harden further. He what? Naruto nodded once. Financial support. Medical supplies. Logistics. The whole pitch. Cornelia's jaw tightened at the thought of Zero being audacious enough to infiltrate one of the most influential companies in Area 11 and attempt to turn it to his side. Before she could press Naruto any further, Euphemia stepped slightly in front of him. That's enough, sister. Cornelia turned toward her at once. Yuffie. No, Euphemia said, more firmly than usual. Naruto has already been put through enough tonight. That made Cornelia pause. Euphemia drew in a breath, then added, I'm escorting him home. Both Naruto and Cornelia stared at her. Naruto recovered first. Yuffie, you don't need to do that. Cornelia's response came at nearly the same time, only much sharper. Absolutely not. You should not be going anywhere tonight without a proper military escort. I will have one, Euphemia replied immediately. 2 guards, if that makes you feel better. It does not, Cornelia said flatly. But Euphemia stood her ground, pink eyes steady in a way that reminded Cornelia very unpleasantly of herself. I am going, Euphemia said. And I refuse to accept no for an answer. That shocked Naruto almost as much as her earlier leap into his arms. Cornelia stared at her younger sister for a long moment, clearly torn between exasperation and reluctant admiration for the sheer stubbornness on display. Naruto, for his part, looked like he wanted to protest further, but one look at Euphemia's face made him realize it would probably be useless. Finally, Cornelia exhaled slowly through her nose. Fine, she said, though the word sounded dragged out of her by force. But you will take 2 guards. And you will return directly afterward. Euphemia brightened immediately. Thank you, sister. Cornelia turned her gaze to Naruto next. And you, she said, still not pleased, or not leaving their sight until you are safely home. Naruto almost said that sounded excessive. Then he looked at Euphemia, still flushed from crying, still visibly worried, but now determined in a way he knew meant resistance was pointless and gave up. All right, he said. And with that, both he and Cornelia relented, though neither of them looked especially happy about the arrangement. Lelouch and CC did not speak for most of the trip back. By the time they finally made it into his room, the silence between them had grown heavy, but not empty. Lelouch's mind was moving too quickly for silence to mean peace. He shut the door behind them a little harder than necessary, pulled off his mask, and stood still for a moment with one hand braced against the desk. Too much had happened. Too much that should not have happened. CC watched him from the bed as she removed her hat and let her hair spill down over her shoulders. She could practically feel the storm of thoughts raging inside him. Lelouch turned abruptly. Why did my Geass fail on Naruto? There was no preamble. No attempt at easing into the question. He wanted the answer too badly for that. And while we're at it, he continued, more sharply now, why did Naruto or more importantly, Minato, have Madara's nightmare frame in that hidden lab? His violet eyes narrowed. Unless Madara stole it without them knowing. CC said nothing for a beat. Then Lelouch's gaze sharpened even further as a new possibility struck him. All that time you spent with Naruto, he said slowly. Did you give him Geass? CC answered immediately. No. The response was flat, certain, and utterly without hesitation. Lelouch stared at her, searching her face for any sign of uncertainty, but she only stared back. I did not give Naruto Geass, CC repeated. That did not resolve the larger question. Then why didn't it work? Lelouch demanded. My Geass should have taken hold. Eye contact was established. The command was clear. There was no interference. He took a step toward her. So tell me why it failed. CC crossed one leg over the other and folded her arms. I don't know. Lelouch's expression hardened at once. You expect me to believe that? I said I don't know, CC replied, her tone growing cooler. There could be any number of reasons. An unusual resistance. Some condition I'm unaware of. Something unique to him. She shrugged faintly. Not every mystery in the world begins and ends with me. Lelouch did not accept that. Not even a little. No, he said. That's too vague. You know more than you're saying. You always do. CC gave him a dry look. And you always assume that means I'm obligated to share. Lelouch ignored the jab. Naruto resists my Geass. Minato's hidden lab contains technology far beyond what Namikaze Corporation should publicly possess, and they somehow have Madara's nightmare frame under their roof. He shook his head, trying to force the pieces together. These are not unrelated facts. For several seconds he paced in silence, his thoughts circling the same impossible points. Then, slowly, the edges of his reasoning shifted. The genjutsu that concealed Naruto's link to Madara from ordinary realization pressed quietly against his thoughts, not erasing them, but nudging them away from one particular conclusion every time he drew near it. Lelouch frowned. If Minato didn't knowingly acquire the machine, he said, more to himself now, then Madara must have stolen the plans. CC remained perfectly still. Lelouch kept going, the theory settling into place with deceptive ease. Yes, he said. That makes more sense. He stole the design data for the frame, then constructed a copy of it himself. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Which would mean Madara has access to engineering resources and technical knowledge on a scale I underestimated. CC's lips curved ever so slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it was close. Lelouch noticed. You find that amusing. A little, CC admitted. Lelouch exhaled through his nose and turned away from her, one hand coming up to cover his eyes for a brief second. None of this sat right. Not the failure of his Geass. Not the hidden lab. Not the impossible technology. Not Madara's nightmare somehow existing inside the Namikaze Corporation's underground facility. And most of all, not Naruto. Because of all the things that should have happened tonight, one of them absolutely should have been Naruto falling under his command. Instead, Naruto had looked him in the eye and said no. Lelouch lowered his hand slowly. That changes things, he said at last. CC watched him in silence. Yes, she said. It does. And as Lelouch stood there wrestling with everything he had seen, CC leaned back against the bed with that same faint smirk still ghosting across her face, content for now to let him chase the wrong answer. The car ride back to the Namikaze household was quiet. Naruto sat in the backseat with Euphemia beside him, while the two Britannian guards rode in front, stiff-backed and visibly displeased. Not that either of them dared say anything. The entire trip, Euphemia had stayed closer than propriety probably allowed for a princess, holding onto Naruto's arm as if letting go might somehow make him vanish. Naruto had noticed. So had the guards. They had exchanged more than one strained look in the rearview mirror, but they kept their thoughts to themselves. Euphemia was worried, and neither man was brave enough or foolish enough to challenge her while she was in that state. Naruto glanced out the window as the car finally pulled up in front of the Namikaze household. The familiar sight of home should have been comforting. Instead, after everything that had happened tonight, it only made him feel tired. He let out a long sigh. Yuffie, he said softly, we're here. Euphemia blinked, as though returning to herself, but she still did not let go of his arm right away. When she finally did, she looked faintly embarrassed by how tightly she had been clinging to him. Naruto got out first, then waited for her before leading the way to the door. The guards followed at a respectful distance. Inside, the lights were still on. Mito was in the entryway almost immediately, and the moment she saw Naruto with Euphemia her eyes widened in shock. Nah. Whatever she had been about to say died in her throat the second Naruto shot her a sharp look. Go to bed, he said. Mito blinked. For a second, she looked like she might protest. Especially since there was clearly something she wanted to say, and from the flash of realization in her eyes, Naruto had a pretty good idea that Colin had been about to be part of it. But after a moment, Mito nodded reluctantly. Okay, she said slowly, still looking between Naruto and Euphemia with obvious confusion before turning and heading deeper into the house. Naruto waited until she was fully gone before letting out another breath. Beside him, Euphemia looked up at him again, her expression softening with worry. Naruto, she asked quietly, are you really alright? Naruto turned to her. Yes, he said, more gently this time. I'm okay. He meant it, mostly. He was tired, confused, annoyed, and not entirely sure how tonight had spiraled into half the things it had, but he was physically fine. Euphemia studied his face for another moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Then, before Naruto could say anything else, she rose slightly onto her toes and kissed him. By the time his brain caught up to what had just happened, Euphemia had already pulled back, her cheeks faintly pink but her gaze steady. Good, she said softly. Then she turned and made her way back toward the waiting car, leaving Naruto standing in the entryway staring after her in total shock. One of the guards opened the car door for her with the resigned expression of a man who had already decided that tonight was above his pay grade. Naruto remained where he was for several long seconds. Then he slowly lifted a hand and touched the spot she had kissed. What? He looked toward the door. Then toward the stairs. Then back toward the car outside. And after everything that had happened tonight, Zero breaking into his office, Colin revealing herself, the military showing up, Cornelia interrogating him, and now this. Naruto could only come to one conclusion. This has got to be the weirdest night of my life, he muttered. Then, after a beat, he added under his breath. And I fought terrorists in the military. The next day, Colin knew something was wrong the moment she looked toward Naruto's usual seat and found it empty. He wasn't there. That alone would have been enough to put her on edge after everything that had happened the night before. But then she realized Lelouch was absent too. That made it worse. Much worse. As the day dragged on, Colin became more and more of a nervous wreck. She barely heard the lessons, barely registered when teachers called on other students, barely even noticed when the bell rang between classes. Her mind kept circling back to Naruto. To what she had confessed. To what he had said. To the kiss they had shared in the middle of that disaster. To Zero. To the military. To everything that had gone so horribly, painfully wrong all at once. And the worst part was that she had no idea what Naruto was thinking now. That uncertainty gnawed at her. At one point, Shirley passed her in the hall and tried to say something, but none of the Orangette's words seemed to reach her. Later Millie caught her by the arm and tried to get her attention with more restraint than usual, clearly picking up on Colin's state, but even that only barely registered. By the time classes ended, Colin was too wound up to think clearly. So she walked. She did not really choose a direction. She just kept moving until, before she fully realized it, she found herself standing in front of the Namikaze household. Her heart jumped into her throat. Before she could decide whether to turn back around, the front door opened and Mito stepped outside. Mito blinked in surprise when she saw her. Colin. Colin looked almost as startled as if she had been caught trespassing. Mito studied her for a second, then her expression softened. Is everything all right? That question broke the thin shell of composure Colin had been clinging to all day. Is Naruto okay? She asked quietly. He wasn't at school. Mito's eyes sharpened just a fraction, but she nodded. Yeah, he's okay. Some of the tension left Colin's shoulders at once, though not nearly enough. Mito noticed. After only a moment, she stepped aside. Come in. Colin hesitated, but then nodded and followed her inside. The moment she entered, she realized something else was unusual. Minato and Kushina were both home. That alone told her more than she wanted to know. They must have returned early because of what had happened with Zero and Naruto. The atmosphere in the house was calm on the surface, but there was tension beneath it, the kind left behind after a crisis everyone was still trying to process. Kushina looked up first when they came in. Her gaze landed on Colin, and the first thing Colin saw there was not suspicion. It was worry. Not just for Naruto. For her too. Colin, Kushina said gently. Colin lowered her eyes. I'm sorry for just showing up like this. Don't apologize, Kushina said at once. Then, after one glance toward the upper floor, she pushed herself up with clear purpose. Come on. Colin followed her upstairs on uncertain legs until they stopped outside Naruto's room. Kushina knocked once. Naruto, she called through the door, voice deceptively calm, Colin is here, and you need to talk to her. There was silence from inside. Kushina's eye twitched. You can open this door yourself, she went on, or I can break it down and make you talk to her. There was a beat. Then the door opened. Naruto stood there looking tired, conflicted, and more than a little resigned. He glanced at Kushina, then at Colin, then stepped back. Kushina gave them both one long look that made it clear she was invested in this conversation whether they liked it or not. Then she smiled thinly and said, good, before leaving them alone. Colin stepped inside. Naruto shut the door behind her, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then Naruto rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and looked away. I should probably start by apologizing, he said. Colin blinked. What? Naruto grimaced. For kissing you like that last night. He finally looked back at her. Everything was so messed up and confusing, and he let out a frustrated breath. I don't know. It happened. And I probably shouldn't have done that without really knowing where your head was at. Colin stared at him, caught off guard. Naruto gave a helpless little shrug. It was a weird night. That almost made Colin laugh, except she was too emotional for it. Naruto exhaled and, because apparently he had decided honesty was the only way through this, added, also, Yuffie kissed me last night too. Colin's eyes widened. Naruto immediately raised both hands a little. Which I am still trying to process, by the way, because that came out of absolutely nowhere. For a second Colin just looked at him. Then she crossed the room in 3 quick steps, grabbed the front of his shirt, and kissed him. Naruto froze in shock. When she pulled back, Colin was breathing hard, eyes bright, voice trembling, but steady enough. I love you. Naruto stared at her. Colin's grip on his shirt tightened. I love you, she repeated, firmer now. And last night, her voice shook. Last night I almost lost you because I'm a member of the Black Knights. Because of the side I chose. Because I kept lying to you. And when I thought about that, when I thought about never seeing you again, it made everything painfully clear. Naruto was still looking at her like his brain had just stopped working. Colin pressed on, cheeks flushed but refusing to look away. So no, I don't care that Euphemia kissed you, she said. Because your heart is so damn big it just pulls people in whether you mean to or not. A shaky little smile touched her lips. That's just who you are. Naruto opened his mouth. Closed it then opened it again. You love me. Colin actually looked offended. That's what you took from all of that. Naruto blinked rapidly, still trying to catch up. No, I mean, yes, obviously, but. Colin let out a wet laugh that was dangerously close to turning into tears. Idiot. Naruto stared at her for one more second. Then he laughed too, soft and disbelieving, and pulled her into his arms. This time, when he kissed her, there was no confusion in it. No chaos. No battlefield still echoing in the background. Just the two of them. And when they parted, Naruto rested his forehead lightly against hers and smiled in that open, impossible way of his. I love you too, he said. Colin's breath caught. And for the first time since the night before, everything inside her finally felt still. From the shadows beyond the lit windows of the Namikaze household, she watched in silence. Inside, Naruto stood close to Colin in the quiet of his room, the tension between them finally giving way to something neither of them had been able to keep buried much longer. His hand lifted to her face. Colin's breath caught. Then Naruto kissed her. For one sharp, ugly second, the sight went through her like a blade. Her fingers tightened at her sides. Horror came first. Not because he was kissing someone. Because it wasn't her. Because for a heartbeat, some selfish, wounded part of her had still held onto the impossible, that if she ever found her way back to him, there would still be a place waiting for her. Then that feeling cracked, and something quieter took its place. Relief. Sad, aching relief. Because he was smiling. Because he wasn't alone. Because when she had vanished from his life, when she had been ripped away before she could even reach for him again, she had left him with grief, confusion, and blood. If she could not be there for him now, then at least someone was. Her eyes softened as she watched him pull away just enough to look at Colin, the warmth on his face unguarded and real. Good, she whispered to no one. Her voice was so low it never reached the glass. Then the memory came back. Rain. Blood. Cold pavement beneath her back. Her breath came in wet, shallow pulls as the world blurred above her. The sky was orange and gray and wrong, and Naruto's voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Inko, hey, stay with me. Look at me. She had tried. She really had. But everything hurt, and everything was fading, and Naruto's hands were shaking as he pressed them against the wound, trying so hard to hold her together. Then the world shifted. Not the street. Not the sky. Something deeper. Something stranger. A figure stood there where there should have been nothing, a small child in pale clothing, with violet eyes and a smile that made her weak, dying heart recoil on instinct. He crouched beside her as if blood and panic and grief were nothing more than weather. Well, he said lightly, this is unfortunate. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Naruto was still there, still shouting her name. Still trying to keep her alive. And yet somehow this man existed outside all of that, as though he were standing in a separate layer of the world. Finally, Inko managed to whisper, who? He smiled. BV. The name meant nothing to her. At least then. BV. Tilted his head, studying her with calm interest while Naruto's desperate voice carried on somewhere just beyond him. You're dying, Inko. Her eyes widened. He had said her name like he had always known it. Like it belonged to him. She tried to turn toward Naruto. Tried to reach for him. Her hand barely moved. BV's expression never changed. Tell me, he said, almost pleasantly, if I save your life, what would you do with it? Inko's vision swam. Naruto. That was all she could think about. Naruto kneeling in the street, covered in her blood, breaking apart in front of her. So she forced the words out. If, her throat burned. If I can, save Naruto. Vivi's smile widened just a fraction. Then yes. Tears blurred her eyes. Yes, Inko whispered. Yes, if it lets me save Naruto. Something changed then. Her vision snapped into terrible clarity. Vivi's Geass burned. And in the same instant, something awakened inside her in answer. It hurt. God, it hurt. Her mind split around the command, around the fear, around the desperate need to stay close to the boy she loved even if the world itself had to bend to make it possible. Her Geass activated. Not like a weapon. Not like a command. Like a lie so complete it became real. The illusion did not just cover her. It created a second body. A second her. A copy so perfect that even reality accepted it. And that copy died in Naruto's arms. Inko saw it happen with her own eyes, half there and half torn away from the world, as the false body bled out while Naruto screamed her name. Then the soldiers laughed. And Naruto changed. His eyes turned red. The world twisted. The air screamed. He moved like grief had put on flesh. He tore through them with a fury that stopped being human almost immediately. Inko tried to call out to him. Tried to stop him. Tried to reach him before he drowned in what they had done to both of them. And for one blessed, impossible instant, she did. Not fully. Not enough. But enough to feel his rage turn toward her. Enough to make him hesitate. Enough for VV to lay a hand on her shoulder and pull her away before the moment could become anything else. We'll see him again, VV said, as Naruto's broken, furious shape vanished behind distance and distortion. But not yet. Inko shook violently, tears burning her eyes. Naruto. Not yet, VV repeated. For now, I have something I want you to do. And the world took her. The memory broke. She was back outside the Namikaze household, hidden in the dark, with Naruto still inside and Colin still close enough to him to make the ache in her chest return. Then her phone vibrated. Her expression hardened at once. She answered without taking her eyes off the window. Yes. VV's voice came through the line, smooth and faintly amused. Inko. Just hearing her own name in his voice made her jaw tighten. Have you located CC? Yet? He asked. Not yet, Inko answered, her tone flat. But I found one of her contractors. Oh. Inko's eyes narrowed slightly. He's unstable, she said. But useful. He'll lead me straight to CC. If I let him. VV hummed softly on the other end. I hope you're right. Inko said nothing. Then VV added, with that same lightness that always made her skin crawl. You need to find her, Inko. After all, it will be interesting for you to be able to see Naruto in person after 3 years. The words hit like ice. Inko's hand tightened around the phone. For a second, she didn't answer. Then the line went dead. Slowly, her face darkened. She lowered the phone and stared at it for a moment, anger rising cold and clean beneath her skin. Then she looked back toward the window. Naruto was still there. Still alive. Still smiling for someone else. Still the center of every thought she had ever failed to escape. Her expression softened, just for a second. Then she turned away. But not before giving him one last look. And when she finally walked off into the dark, there was nothing gentle in the way her eyes had hardened again. The man behind the counter at the gun shop looked up in annoyance when the silver-haired customer sauntered in like he owned the place. Mao tilted his head, visor gleaming faintly under the harsh fluorescent lights, and tapped 2 fingers against the glass display case. I want a handgun. The clerk stared at him. Permit. Mao's smile widened. Ah, he said lightly, there's the problem. No permit, no gun. The seller folded his arms. And if you keep loitering, I'm calling the police. Mao's head dipped, almost in amusement. Then he laughed softly. You should be more careful what you threaten people with, he murmured. The clerk's expression hardened. What? Mao stepped closer, lowering his voice. You keep a radio under the counter. You check the door every few seconds because you're nervous. And you've got a Black Knight's pin hidden in your coat pocket because you're stupid enough to think that makes you brave. His grin sharpened. So why don't we stop pretending you're just a humble shopkeeper? The man went white. Mao's eyes flashed beneath the visor. Give me the gun. A second later, a handgun and a box of ammunition were slid across the counter with shaking hands. Mao picked them up with a hum of approval. See, that wasn't so hard. He turned for the door, then paused. You know, if I were you, I'd be more worried about the people you're helping than the people you're hiding from. Then he left, chuckling to himself while the clerk stood frozen behind the counter. Lelouch found CC in his room, seated near the window like she had all the time in the world, despite the tension closing in around them from every direction. You sent the Black Knights after Mao, she said without looking at him. You've set cameras. You're watching every possible entrance. She finally turned her head. And yet you still won't use me as bait. Lelouch's eyes narrowed. I'm not dangling you in front of a madman just to see what happens. CC gave a faint shrug. That's the most efficient way to draw him out. No, Lelouch said flatly. It's the most reckless. For a moment, silence settled between them. Then Lelouch's expression changed, becoming more thoughtful. More uneasy. CC, he said, quieter now, if I keep using Geass. Will I become like Mao? That got her full attention. What exactly are you asking? She said. Lelouch looked away for a second. You told me before that Geass grows stronger the more it's used. His jaw tightened. So tell me plainly. Does that mean I'll end up like him? Or does that only happen if I fail to fulfill the contract? CC watched him for several seconds before answering. The more a Geass is used, the more powerful it becomes. That much is true. She folded her hands loosely in her lap. But power isn't the only issue. The real problem is whether the person wielding it has the strength to bear it without being crushed by it. Lelouch's gaze sharpened. And if they don't? Then Geass stops being a tool, CC said, and starts becoming the thing that controls them. Lelouch stared at her. Then anger broke through. So you make these contracts anyway? He demanded. You hand out this kind of power to people because of your own selfish needs. CC's expression cooled. What is your greatest wish? Lelouch pressed. What is so important that you would create someone like Mao? When she didn't answer, his frustration only deepened. You really are a monster, he said bitterly. If you had any mercy in you at all, you would have put him out of his misery long ago. For the first time, something flickered across CC's face. It vanished almost immediately. Without another word, she stood and walked for the door. Where are you going? Lelouch asked. To search, she said. Since apparently neither of us is getting any peace tonight. She left him with that. At the military facility, Suzaku stood awkwardly while Cecile went over a clipboard. You have a medical exam coming up, she said. Suzaku blinked. A medical exam? Yes, Cecile replied matter-of-factly. Standard procedure. All nightmare pilots have to undergo them. Lloyd, lounging nearby, looked delighted at the confusion on Suzaku's face. You mean you thought they were just going to let you keep throwing yourself into the cockpit without checking if you're breaking apart? Suzaku sighed. No, not exactly. Then, after a moment, he added, do you think it would be possible to arrange a meeting with Princess Euphemia? Lloyd looked at him as if he had just asked whether the moon could be requisitioned for military testing. No, he said cheerfully. You're not a knight. Suzaku frowned. What does that have to do with anything? Cecile looked up from her clipboard. An earl can request an audience. Suzaku stared at her. An earl? Lloyd's grin widened. Oh dear. Did no one tell you? You're an earl? Suzaku asked, genuinely stunned. Lloyd gave a dramatic incline of his head. The very one. Suzaku just stared. And, despite himself, his thoughts drifted, not to Euphemia at first, but to Mito. To the way she frowned when something bothered her. To the sharpness in her eyes whenever she caught him off guard. To the way she had looked the last time he'd seen her, half annoyed and half worried. He had not meant to think of her this often. That only seemed to make it happen more. Earth to Suzaku, Lloyd said. Suzaku blinked. Sorry. Lloyd smirked. Thinking about princesses. Suzaku's face warmed slightly. No. Cecile's expression turned amused, but she mercifully said nothing. Later, Lelouch found Millie in the student council building. He did not bother with pleasantries. I need the building locked down, he said. Millie looked at him over the rim of her drink, then sighed dramatically. You really do know how to ruin the mood. This is important. I know. Her expression softened slightly. You tend not to use that tone unless it is. Lelouch studied her. You're taking this rather well. Millie laughed once. Lelouch, I'm an Ashford. Did you really think I didn't know who you were? That made him pause. Not from the very beginning, Millie admitted. But I figured it out a while ago. Lelouch let out a slow breath. And you said nothing. Because I'm kind. She smiled faintly. And because Nunnally needed peace. Before he could answer, Millie groaned and flopped dramatically against the arm of the couch. I've got a marriage interview coming up, she complained. A proper one. Smiles, manners, perfect little noble daughter routine. She narrowed her eyes at him. Got any advice for escaping? Lelouch almost answered. Then footsteps approached. Shirley came into view, cheerful and carrying a bag over one shoulder. Millie, I wanted to ask about the swimming. She stopped when she saw Lelouch. And then her whole face lit up. Lulu. The warmth in her voice hit him almost harder than if she had slapped him. Shirley hurried over without hesitation, smiling in a way she had not in days, not because of confusion, not because of some missing memory, but because she remembered everything. The fear, the pain, the truth, and the kiss they had shared after all of it. Millie looked between them once, instantly understanding more than Lelouch wanted her to. Shirley slowed only when she got close enough to realize perhaps she was being a little too obvious in front of Millie. Her cheeks pinked, but her smile remained. You're here, she said softly, like it mattered more than it should. Lelouch looked at her for one long second before answering. Yes. Millie leaned her cheek into one hand, looking terribly entertained. Shirley glanced at her, then back at Lelouch. I wanted to see you earlier. So I gathered, Millie said. Shirley went even redder. Millie. Lelouch cleared his throat, trying and failing to regain control of the moment. We're in the same classes. It would have been difficult to avoid each other forever. Shirley smiled at him, small, soft, and far too happy considering everything they had been through. No, she said quietly. I guess it would. Millie's gaze sharpened with understanding, but to her credit, she said nothing more. When Lelouch looked at her meaningfully, she merely waved one hand. I see nothing, she said. I hear nothing. And I definitely don't know anything. Elsewhere, in a narrow alley slick with grime and shadow, CC drove a man back against the wall with one swift kick. He gasped as her boot pressed hard against his chest, pinning him there. Where is Mao? She asked. The man blinked at her wildly. Mao. What? You mean some refrain dealer? Lady, call the cops or the Black Knights or something. I'm not here for either. The man's eyes darted around desperately. Then I don't know. CC leaned closer, golden eyes cold. Then think harder. That night, Lelouch stood over Shirley's desk in the dim quiet of her room, her diary in his hands. He did not need to erase her memories this time. Madara had seen to that in his own way, and Shirley still remembered Lelouch. All of him. Too much of him, perhaps. Which was why Lelouch now stared down at the diary with a different kind of dread. If anyone found it, if anyone read what Shirley had written about Narita, about Zero, about him. He shut it, jaw tight, and fed it to the flames. Paper curled, blackened, and vanished. Elsewhere, the Black Knights reported nothing useful. No sign of Mao. No leads worth following. The man had disappeared again like smoke. When Lelouch returned to CC, his expression had darkened. We're out of options, he said. CC looked at him. So you agree now? I agree, Lelouch said tightly, that working with you is preferable to sitting still while Mao circles. Almost on cue, the phone rang. Lelouch answered, only for Mao's voice to come through in a sing-song tone. Lulu. Put CC on. Lelouch's expression hardened, but he handed the phone over. CC listened in silence for longer than Lelouch liked. Then she ended the call and set the phone down. I'm going with him, she said. Lelouch stared. You can't be serious. He wants me. That keeps you safe. That is not your decision to make. CC looked at him steadily. You should be happy. Instead, Lelouch's Geass flared to life. Stay, he ordered. CC merely looked at him. Then she smiled faintly. That doesn't work on me. Lelouch's hand curled at his side. You know too much, he said through clenched teeth. Yes, CC replied. Which is why I'll keep you safe even when I'm gone. She turned to leave. Lelouch did not stop her again. At the same time, in a different safe house, Ogi held a gun trained on the silver-haired woman he had dragged from the docks. Why were you at the port? He demanded. And what's your name? The woman blinked at him, confused and pale from blood loss. She pressed a hand to her head. I don't know. Ogi's expression darkened. Don't lie to me. I'm not. She pushed herself up a little, wincing. I really don't know. Then, as she shifted, the blanket slipped enough to reveal more of her chest than either of them expected. Ogi immediately looked away, face stiff with discomfort. The woman, however, only let out a relieved sigh. Well, she murmured, settling back against the bedding, at least someone nice found me. Ogi, still holding her at gunpoint, looked like he regretted everything. The medical room was quiet except for the soft rustle of paper as Cecile reviewed Suzaku's examination results. Suzaku sat on the edge of the bed in silence, one hand resting on his knee, his expression calm but inwardly tense. The last few days had left him more exhausted than he wanted to admit, and being told to undergo a full evaluation after Narita had only added to the weight already pressing on him. Cecile glanced up from the clipboard and gave him a small, thoughtful hum. You did well, she said at last. Suzaku blinked. That sounds like there's a but coming. There is, Cecile replied mildly. Your scores in discipline, restraint, and what the assessment calls preservation of humanity are all exceptionally high. She lowered the clipboard a little. Which, as traits go, is hardly a flaw. Suzaku gave a faint smile. Then what's the problem? The problem, Cecile said, is that your answers suggest you are constantly measuring yourself against an impossible standard. Suzaku's smile faded. Cecile continued carefully. Have you ever considered that you may be comparing yourself too much to your father? The words hit harder than Suzaku expected. For a moment, he said nothing. Cecile watched him over the clipboard. Genbu Kururugi was the Prime Minister of Japan. Even without everything else, growing up under the shadow of someone like that would leave its mark on anyone. Suzaku looked away slightly. I'm not saying that is your only issue, Cecile went on, gentler now. But it may explain some of your insecurity. The need to prove yourself. The need to always be right in a moral sense, not just a practical one. Suzaku let out a slow breath. Maybe, he admitted quietly. Cecile gave a small nod, as if that was enough for now. Just then, the phone on the side table buzzed. Suzaku reached for it automatically and frowned when he saw the name. Mito. That alone was enough to make his heartbeat stumble. He picked it up. Hello. On the other end, Mito's voice came through immediately. Suzaku. Yes. There was a pause, and then, in a tone far more direct than he was prepared for, she said, I want you to take me on a proper date. Suzaku froze. Completely. Cecile looked up from the clipboard as Suzaku's face went blank with total shock. What? A proper date, Mito repeated. Not getting dragged into weird school events. Not running into each other during chaos. Not half-finished conversations because something explodes or someone interrupts. Her voice softened just a little. An actual date. With me. On purpose. Suzaku's ears were burning. Cecile's mouth twitched dangerously as she pretended to go back to the clipboard. Suzaku swallowed. Mito, You don't have to answer right this second, Mito cut in, though from the strain in her voice it was obvious she absolutely wanted an answer right that second. But I wanted to say it clearly. Suzaku stared at the wall. Then, quietly, I'd like that. There was silence on the line. Then Mito said, much softer, good. When the call ended, Suzaku lowered the phone slowly, still in shock. Cecile looked at him over the top of the clipboard with a very knowing expression. Was that part of the medical evaluation too? Suzaku asked weakly. No, Cecile said smoothly. But I imagine your heart rate would be very interesting right now. Elsewhere, at the memorial dedicated to Genbu Kururugi, Toto stood with two of his remaining allies in solemn silence. The wind moved softly across the stone, carrying with it the weight of memory and grief that seemed to cling to the place. The men bowed their heads, paying silent respect not only to Genbu, but to all those who had already been lost, especially the remnants of the Japan Liberation Front. None of them noticed the two hidden observers watching Toto from afar. In the Black Knight's mobile base, Lelouch sat before a bank of screens, one hand pressed lightly against his chin as he listened to Diethard's latest report. So the internal restructuring is proceeding? Lelouch asked. Diethard's voice crackled back through the speaker. As well as can be expected. Some resistance, but nothing unmanageable. Lelouch's eyes narrowed slightly. Diethard was useful. Far too useful. And that, more than anything, made him suspicious. He already knew the man was ambitious, opportunistic, and more interested in spectacle than ideals. He might well be reporting to someone else behind Lelouch's back. But for now, he was still useful. On another monitor, a recording waited. The same recording Diethard had managed to procure. CC's phone conversation with Mao. Lelouch watched the screen in silence for a long moment. Then he stood. Clavisland was dead. Or it should have been. When CC entered the abandoned amusement park, the silence there felt unnatural, too still, too deliberate. Rusting rides loomed in the darkness like corpses left standing. Then, all at once, the lights came on. Music crackled to life. The carousel began to turn. And there, seated on one of the painted horses like some grotesque prince in a ruined kingdom, was Mao. He spread his arms wide. CC. Stopped walking. Mao. He smiled at her with fever-bright delight. You came. I knew you would. You always come back to me in the end. I didn't come back to you, CC. Said coldly. I came to end this. Mao tilted his head. Lies. He hopped down from the carousel and began walking toward her, hands in his pockets, grin widening. You love me, he said lightly. Maybe not the way I deserve, but enough. Enough that you still came. No, CC. Said. Mao only chuckled. You think I can't tell. You think I haven't noticed when your heart stumbles. His smile turned sharper. Especially when I mention him. CC's expression did not change. Then Mao said, Madara. It was the smallest reaction. A tightening in her shoulders. A flicker in her eyes. A breath caught half a second too long. But Mao saw it. His grin vanished. For one brief instant, something genuinely ugly crossed his face. Oh, he said softly. CC. Said nothing. Mao's voice became quieter. Meaner. You care. Her fingers tightened at her sides. Mao laughed once, without humor. That's what this is. That's what changed. His eyes widened with a manic sort of delight. You care about Naruto. About Madara. His sister gave it away. Her mind unlike his is an open book. Maybe I should kill him too, wouldn't that be perfect? CC's hand moved too quickly for any normal eye to follow as she drew her gun and aimed it straight at him. But Mao was already faster. The shot cracked. Not hers. CC jerked as pain tore through her arm and the gun went flying from her hand. She staggered, breath catching sharply. Mao lowered his own gun with a delighted little sigh. Still too slow. He crouched near her, smiling like a child playing with a broken toy. You really were going to shoot me, he said. Even after everything. As she bled against the cold concrete, CC closed her eyes for a second. And remembered. A small room. A boy no older than 6, filthy, malnourished, illiterate, and desperate for any voice that didn't scream. Her voice. Listen only to me, she had told him gently. If the world gets too loud, then just listen to my voice. He had clung to that. To her. For weeks that became months, the two had existed in isolation. Mao reading minds he was never meant to hear. CC. The only silence he could ever find. The only person he believed understood him. The only person he ever mistook for salvation. I'll stay with you, she had told him once. And in his shattered mind, that promise had become everything. Back in the present, Mao shot her again. And again. Not killing blows. Not yet. Just enough to leave her unable to rise. CC. Grit her teeth, her vision swimming. Mao knelt beside her, almost tenderly brushing hair from her face. We'll leave, he said. Go somewhere far away. Australia, maybe. Just the two of us. His gaze drifted to the nearby equipment he had brought with him. But you're too big like this, he went on conversationally. So I thought of a way to fix that. He dragged a chainsaw into view with a sound like tearing metal. CC stared at him, and for the first time all night there was something in her eyes beyond anger. At that exact moment, a wall nearby lit up. Mao's head snapped around. Lelouch's image appeared on the screen, projected large enough to dominate the entire space. I'd set that down if I were you, Lelouch said coolly. Mao's eyes widened, then narrowed. You. Lelouch's projected self crossed his arms. I'm at Tokyo Tower. Far enough away that you can't reach me in time. Mao laughed once. Then why show yourself? Lelouch's expression did not change. Because I know something you don't. Mao's grin faltered. Lelouch continued, voice like a knife. I know CC's real name. That made Mao go completely still. On the ground, CC's eyes widened a fraction. Mao's smile returned in a warped, twitching way. Liar. I've heard it from her own lips, Lelouch said. I've seen more of her than you ever have. I know her in ways you never will. Mao's face twisted. He revved the chainsaw and screamed as he slashed the projected image to pieces. You're lying. Then police sirens erupted all around Clavisland. Lights flooded the park from every direction. Mao spun wildly as armed police swarmed the entrance points, rifles up. Lelouch's voice came once more from hidden speakers. You never were difficult to predict. Mao's breathing turned ragged. You think this stops me? He shouted. I know who you are, Zero. I know who Madara really is too. And I know you couldn't hurt your darling Shirley even if you wanted to. Then he charged. The police opened fire. Mao's body jerked violently under the barrage, but even then he kept trying to scream the truth, spit blood, laugh, curse, and lunge all at once until at last the shots dropped him to the ground and silence took him for good. Later, on a rooftop under the cold night wind, the police withdrew, leaving Lelouch and CC alone for the first time since Clavisland. CC sat with one arm bandaged, her face pale but composed. For a while, neither spoke. Then she said quietly, he was 6. Lelouch looked at her. When I gave him Geass, she continued. He was an orphan. Couldn't read. Didn't understand morality or boundaries or what it meant to leave another person alone. Her eyes drifted toward the city lights. When he got Geass, he decided I was everything. Friend. Family. Lover. Reason to live. Lelouch was silent for a moment. Then, and you let him believe it. CC smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. Yes. The wind moved through her hair. Then she glanced at him and said, it was a good plan, by the way. Lelouch raised a brow. Convincing Mao that you knew my real name. Her mouth curved just slightly. It was cruel. Effective. Very you. Lelouch looked away with the faintest smirk. He was never going to believe I'd found a simple way to outplay him. He needed something more personal. And more infuriating, CC added. Yes. For a moment, the smirk faded. Then Lelouch spoke again, more quietly. I won't end up like him. CC looked at him. I won't let Geass control me the way it did Mao, Lelouch said. I'll conquer it. Use it. Master it. His gaze hardened with conviction. And I'll fulfill our contract. CC held his gaze for several seconds. Then Lelouch asked the question he had asked before and would likely ask again. What is your wish? CC did not answer. Instead, she asked softly, why are you doing all of this? Lelouch looked at her, then held out his hand. Because this, he said, is a new contract. CC stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, she took it. And under the night sky, with Mao dead and the weight of Geass still pressing down on both of them, CC accepted. From a ridge of broken stone and shadow above the mountain path, she watched the aftermath in silence. Below, Mao lay sprawled and bleeding, the frantic instability that had driven him finally burned out for good. A little farther away stood Lelouch and CC, close enough to one another that it made something sharp and poisonous twist in her chest. Her eyes narrowed. At first, the feeling came so quickly and so violently that she almost moved before she fully understood it. The witch and her contractor. Part of her wanted to step out of the dark right then, drive a blade through Lelouch's throat, seize CC by the wrist, and drag her away before either of them could react. The thought arrived cold and clean, not as some passing flash of anger, but as a real temptation. Then she crushed the impulse just as quickly as it rose. That would not bring her any closer to what actually mattered. Her jaw tightened as her gaze shifted away from CC and back toward the ground for a moment, where Mao's blood had begun to darken the stone. A dead end, she murmured. That was all he had been in the end. A damaged, unstable creature chasing scraps of obsession and noise. Useful for a moment, perhaps, but not enough. Not nearly enough. Whatever trail he might have offered towards CC had died with him, and all that remained now was a mess VV would inevitably turn into one more irritation in her path. Her expression darkened. Damn VV, she whispered. Always pulling. Always watching. Always deciding where she could and could not go. Always keeping her away from Naruto. That thought hurt more than she wanted to admit. And because it hurt, she forced it down. She would not stand here thinking about him. Not now. Not when it only made the hollow ache inside her sharper. Hope was dangerous. Worse than dangerous. It made people weak, made them linger too long, made them believe they could still reach for something already taken from them. Still, as she stood there in the dark, with the mountain wind moving softly through her hair, one thought slipped through anyway. Maybe I really will see him again. The idea came quiet and fragile, almost against her will. And for one brief second, she let herself feel it. Then she buried that too. By the time she turned away from the scene below, her face had gone cold again. When she reported back, that was what she would say. Mao had been a dead end. He was dead. There had been no useful way to track CC through him after all. Simple. Clean. Final. Whether VV believed her or not was his problem. Without another glance toward Lelouch or CC, she stepped back into the darkness and disappeared down the mountainside, already turning her thoughts away from the dead, the witch, and the boy she refused to let herself hope for. The directorate was waiting. And for now, that was where she had to go. Several days after Zero's break-in at the Namikaze Corporation, long after the immediate chaos had settled and the public explanation had been smoothed over into something respectable and false, Minato still sat in his office reviewing the security logs. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the monitors and the occasional click of a key beneath his fingers. On the largest screen, he had the internal routes pulled up again, the executive floor, the concealed elevator, the hidden access line beneath the building, and finally the secured lab that housed the Izanagi and Izanami. Minato's expression was calm. Which was usually how Kushina knew he was irritated. The door opened behind him. Kushina stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of tea, and stopped when she saw that he was still staring at the same series of recordings. You're still at it? She asked. Minato did not look away from the screens. For now. Kushina crossed the room and set one of the cups down beside him before glancing at the display herself. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You're still trying to figure out why the seals failed. That got the smallest shift out of him. Minato leaned back a fraction in his chair and finally looked up at her. They didn't fail. Kushina blinked. For a second, she just stared at him. Then she frowned. What? Minato turned one of the screens toward her. Floor plans overlaid with chakra markers and seal structures spread across it in careful lines and layered formulas. Over the years, both of them had built those protections into the Namikaze Corporation piece by piece. Not just security systems. Not just locks and hidden entrances. Seals worked into walls, floors, hallways, elevator shafts, doors, and access points. Barriers designed to divert, deny, or expose anyone who tried to enter areas they were never meant to find. Certain routes could only be passed safely by people the seal structure had been coded to recognize. Everyone else would be turned away, trapped, or quietly redirected long before they even realized something was wrong. It was one of the reasons Minato had been so unsettled by what happened. The Black Knights should not have been able to reach that lab. Minato's eyes shifted back to the screen. The seals have been functioning the entire time, he said. Kushina's frown deepened. Then how the hell did Zero get in? Minato was quiet for a moment. That silence alone told her he had already reached an answer he didn't like. Kushina's eyes narrowed. Do you think Naruto added Colin to the seal permissions? Minato shook his head immediately. No. His answer came too quickly to leave room for doubt. Naruto's good, he said. Far better than he should be at his age. But he isn't anywhere near the level needed to alter a seal structure like that without me or you noticing. Not one this layered. Kushina folded her arms. Then how did they get access? Minato exhaled softly and looked back at the floor plan, at the carefully marked routes that should have remained inaccessible. I have a theory. Kushina said nothing, waiting. Minato's gaze settled on the names in his head before he spoke them aloud. The people the seals recognize are us, of course. You, me, Naruto, and Mito. Kushina nodded once. That much was obvious. But Minato kept going. After the invasion, I added 3 more. Kushina's expression changed immediately. She already knew where this was going. Suzaku, Minato said. Nunnally. And Lelouch. The room went still. Minato's voice remained even, but there was something tired underneath it now. At the time, it was practical. Especially for Lelouch and Nunnally. If things had gone worse, if we'd needed to move them quickly, I didn't want the building's protections turning on them while we were trying to keep them alive. Kushina stared at him for a long second. Then her jaw tightened. We know Zero can't be Suzaku, she said flatly. Not after the bridge incident. And Nunnally is, she cut herself off, because there was no need to finish that sentence. Minato did it for her. That leaves Lelouch. Kushina's hand tightened into a fist. For one sharp second, chakra almost flickered in the air around her before she forced it down. Oh, I am going to set that boy straight. Minato's voice stopped her before she could turn toward the door. No. Kushina looked back at him, startled and irritated. No. There's no point. That only made her more annoyed. What do you mean there's no point? She demanded. He used access we gave him knowingly or not to bring armed men into our building, Minato. I know. Then why not? Minato was quiet for a moment. When he answered, his voice was calm, but there was a weight to it that made Kushina's anger ease just enough for the words to land. Because Lelouch is too far in. Kushina said nothing. Minato looked down at the screen again, but he was no longer seeing the floor plan. He's not standing at the edge of this anymore, he said. He crossed that line a while ago. Whatever you or I say to him now won't pull him back. Not really. Kushina let out a slow breath through her nose. She hated that he was probably right. After a few seconds, she moved to the side of his desk and sat down, the earlier heat draining out of her shoulders and leaving something sadder in its place. Do you think Nunnally knows? She asked at last. Minato's answer came without hesitation. No. Kushina looked at him. Minato's expression softened, just barely. Lelouch would move heaven and earth to protect his sister, he said. He would never risk her knowing if he thought it would endanger her. Kushina's mouth curved faintly, though there was no real amusement in it. Yeah, she said. You're right. Silence settled over the room again. Then, after a moment, Kushina gave a quiet, weary chuckle and leaned back slightly in her chair. Our 3 boys are really set in their ways, aren't they? Minato's eyes shifted toward her. For a second, neither of them needed to explain who she meant. Naruto. Suzaku. Lelouch. 3 boys they had all watched grow up in one way or another. 3 boys carrying far too much. 3 boys already walking paths that were starting to bend toward one another in all the worst ways. Minato looked back at the screen, but his thoughts were somewhere far beyond the office walls now. They are, he said. Then his voice grew quieter. But I'm afraid that soon. Kushina's smile faded. Minato finished the thought anyway. All three of them are going to come to blows with one another. The words hung in the room like a warning. Kushina lowered her gaze. Minato said nothing more. Neither of them did. And in the quiet that followed, with the corporation secure around them and the future moving steadily closer whether they wanted it to or not, both of them understood the same thing. When that day came, no seal in the world would be enough to stop it. The repaired Gurren Mk2 stood in the test bay like a crimson beast returned from battle, its armor newly restored but its presence no less intimidating than before. Overhead lights reflected in sharp lines across the Nightmare's frame as engineers and technicians moved around it with final checks and muted tension. Inside the cockpit, Colin flexed her fingers over the controls and let out a slow breath. Systems green, one of Rakshata's assistants called up. Radiant wave surger stable. Mobility output within expected range. Colin's lips curved into a small smile. Then let's see if, expected, is enough. The launch platform shifted, and moments later the Gurren burst forward in a blur of red and black, its movements clean, vicious, and precise. It cut through the testing course with brutal grace, leaping barriers, pivoting between obstacles, and firing off practiced bursts with a confidence that came more naturally to Colin than breathing. Yet even as she fought the machine through its paces, part of her mind was elsewhere. On Naruto. On the way he had looked at her. On the way he had said I love you too. Heat rose to her face inside the cockpit and she clicked her tongue at herself. Focus, she muttered, though the smile stayed. She had almost lost him. She knew that now more than ever. And maybe that was why the simple memory of him standing in his room, surprised and honest in hers, made her chest feel so painfully light. The Gurren landed hard, rose again, and Colin pushed it into another fast turn. He confessed to me. Even now it felt unreal. The Gurren's clawed hand slammed into a reinforced target, the radiant wave surger crackling to life and reducing the test dummy to molten ruin. The engineers below cheered. Colin only grinned wider. Back at the Black Knight's mobile base, Lelouch stood before a screen with his mask on, listening in silence as Diethard reported the latest developments. India and the Kyoto House have reached an understanding, Diethard said smoothly. And Rakshata Chala is expected to arrive soon. Zero's posture did not change. Good. Diethard continued. We've also expanded our effective control. 14 subsidiaries are now operating under our banner, and we've secured practical monopolistic control over warehouse distribution across Japan. That drew a small, thoughtful pause from Zero. With expansion, Diethard added, comes exposure. 47 of our members have been arrested. Zero's voice sharpened slightly. Can Britannia get anything from them? No, Diethard replied. They're too low-ranking to know anything useful. Inoue, standing nearby, folded her arms. Tell him the rest. Diethard glanced aside, then back to the screen. Toto has still not been located. That made Zero go quiet for a moment. I see, he said at last. Continue the search. The screen went dark. Diethard lowered the receiver and turned to Inoue. Well, he said lightly, what will be done about Madara? Inoue frowned. What do you mean? Diethard gave a small shrug. He remains an independent variable. One too strong to ignore. His eyes narrowed. And what about the Namikaze Corporation? Did we uncover any blackmail worth using to force their compliance? Inoue's expression hardened at once. No. And even if we had, that would have been Zero's call. Diethard hummed, amused. Of course. But the look in his eyes made it clear he was still thinking about both. Madara. And the Namikazes. Both dangerous in entirely different ways. Later, in a quieter chamber of the base, Lelouch set a passport down in front of CC. You're going to be an ambassador, he said. CC picked up the forged document and examined it with mild amusement. How flattering. It will get you through the meeting with the Chinese Federation without unnecessary complications. CC looked up at him. And here I thought you trusted me to improvise. I trust you to cause complications if left unsupervised. That got the faintest smirk out of her. She turned the passport over in her hand, then looked away for a brief second, her thoughts drifting. Naruto. The name came unbidden. She hoped, though she would never say it aloud, that when this was over, when she returned from this little diplomatic farce, she would see him again. See him alive. See him smiling in that infuriating, impossible way of his. She hid the thought almost as soon as it came. What? Lelouch asked, catching the brief shift in her expression. Nothing, CC said, too smoothly. Lelouch narrowed his eyes, but let it go. Neither of them knew that somewhere out there, Mao was still alive. That night, Suzaku walked beside Lelouch beneath the fading light of afternoon, hands in his pockets, expression quieter than usual. Cutting class again? Lelouch asked dryly. Suzaku gave a sheepish smile. You say that like you weren't doing the same thing. That's different. I'm me. Suzaku laughed softly at that. For a moment, things felt almost normal. But then his thoughts drifted, as they had been doing far too often lately. To Mito. To her voice on the phone asking for a proper date. To how direct she had been. To how warm his face had felt afterward. You look distracted, Lelouch said. Suzaku blinked. Do I? Yes. It's nothing. Lelouch gave him the sort of look that made it clear he did not believe that for a second. Suzaku looked away, and for one dangerous instant almost said too much. It's just, things are getting complicated. Lelouch raised a brow. That sounds ominous. Suzaku smiled faintly. Not that kind of complicated. That only made Lelouch more suspicious. Before he could pry any further, the scream of Rival's sidecar tore through the moment. The vehicle skidded in beside them and Rival's practically launched himself out. Lelouch. He wailed, getting right in his face. Why didn't you tell me Millie's marriage interview was today? Lelouch looked unimpressed. Why would I? Because it would make me cry. Then I definitely shouldn't have told you. Rival's pointed an accusing finger at him. Boys do not cry. Suzaku, trying not to laugh, put a hand on Rival's shoulder. You seem upset. Rival's rounded on him dramatically. Don't go all emo and comforting on me. Suzaku blinked. I wasn't. Lelouch sighed and turned away. I'm going to tell Nunnally about dinner before you become any more unbearable. Dinner. Rival's cried out. You planned dinner and didn't invite me either. Lelouch kept walking. Suzaku fell into step after him, but as they moved away, his thoughts once again slipped toward Mito. He wondered what she would wear on a proper date. And immediately hated himself for thinking that. The memory came to Lelouch later that evening, sharp and unwelcome. He was younger there. Smaller. Nunnally was on his back, her arms around his shoulders, while Suzaku ran beside him. Smoke filled the air. The smell of blood and fire clung to everything. Bodies lay around them in the dark. Too many bodies. Nunnally, blind and frightened, whispered, Lelouch, what's that smell? Lelouch's throat had felt raw. It's just a garbage dump nearby, he lied. Suzaku stumbled a step and nearly fell. When Lelouch looked at him, he saw it clearly. The horror, the shock, the breaking point. Suzaku had been trying so hard not to look at the dead. Not to hear the screams still echoing in his mind. Then Nunnally, not seeing any of it, had reached one small hand out and touched Suzaku's face. It's okay, she had whispered. Suzaku had gone very still. And for one brief moment, amid all that death, the three of them had kept moving because none of them knew how to do anything else. That memory shifted. Another one layered over it. Minato and Kushina finding them at last. Kushina had crouched down immediately, eyes wide with alarm as she looked over the three children. Oh my god, she whispered. Lelouch, Suzaku. A younger Naruto stood behind her, confused and worried, with Mito beside him looking just as shaken. Minato had moved fast but gently, his voice steady in a way that seemed to calm the world just a little. You're safe now, he had said. Lelouch remembered not believing that. Not at first. He remembered Kushina helping ease Nunnally from his back, remembered Naruto staring at him with concern too open to be fake, remembered Mito looking between the three of them in silence, understanding enough even then to know something terrible had happened. He remembered Suzaku finally breaking down only after they were found. Back in the present, Nunnally sat in the student council building carefully folding a paper crane, her fingers moving with gentle concentration. The room was quiet. Then the door opened. Nunnally. Came Sayoko's voice. Nunnally smiled faintly. Yes. But something in the silence that followed was wrong. Not Sayoko. Then came soft clapping. Nunnally froze. Well now, Mao said with a grin as he stepped into the room, his body heavily bandaged but his eyes just as feverish as ever. What a lovely little secret you are. The laboratory was far too bright, far too sterile, and far too full of odd machinery for what was supposed to be a marriage interview. Millie Ashford sat with impeccable posture and an amused smile, hands folded neatly in her lap as she looked across the table at Lloyd Asplund. Cecile stood off to the side with the sort of professional calm that suggested she had already decided this entire situation was ridiculous. Lloyd, for his part, looked entirely too comfortable. I suppose, he said cheerfully, that having the interview in my lab instead of a hotel drawing room must be a little strange. Millie crossed one leg over the other and smiled back. Not really. I was told you were unique. Lloyd brightened. Marvelous. I do like honesty. The Ashford family had been pushing this meeting with all the grace of a battering ram. Millie knew exactly why. If the match went well, it would strengthen the family's standing and possibly restore some of the noble weight the Ashfords had lost over the years. Lloyd, however, looked about as interested in the politics of marriage as he was in learning basket weaving. Cecile stepped forward and set down drinks for the two of them. Thank you, Cecile, Millie said sweetly. You're welcome, Cecile replied, though her expression said she deserved hazard pay. Lloyd took one sip of his drink, then looked at Millie as if a thought had only just occurred to him. You know, he said, we could skip the interview entirely. Millie blinked. Excuse me. Well, Lloyd said, if the point is marriage, then why not just get married? Saves time, avoids awkwardness, frees up my schedule. Millie stared at him. Cecile closed her eyes briefly, like she had expected this exact disaster. Lord Asplund, Cecile said carefully, that is not how these things work. Isn't it? Lloyd asked. No, Millie said at the same time, her smile now frozen in place. It absolutely is not. Back at the student council room, the atmosphere was far livelier. Rivals was in the middle of dramatic hand gestures as he leaned over the table, fully committed to his role as gossip distributor. I'm telling you, it was weird, he said. Lelouch and Shirley were acting all tense around each other earlier, and then they disappeared, and then he wouldn't explain anything. Shirley, seated a little closer to the window, turned pink at once. Rivals. What? Rivals asked. I'm just saying. Nina, perched near the computer with her hands folded in her lap, looked concerned. Do you think something happened? Suzaku, seated nearby, frowned slightly. It does feel strange. Colin, who had been trying and mostly failing to look unaffected, crossed her arms. Maybe it's better if they work out whatever it is on their own. Suzaku glanced at her. You're surprisingly calm about it. Colin raised a brow. Should I be throwing a fit? No, but. Rivals cut in with a sigh. Lelouch is good at theory, terrible at actual people. If he and Shirley are fighting, it's probably because he said something smart and emotionally devastating without realizing it. Shirley looked at the table, cheeks still pink, though there was a softness in her expression now instead of embarrassment. Whatever had passed between her and Lelouch, she clearly wasn't upset in the way Rivals imagined. At another table, Naruto sat with one arm draped lazily over the back of his chair while Mito stood beside him, leaning against the edge of the desk. Colin was close enough to him that the distance between them was suspiciously non-existent, and Mito had noticed and smirked since she knew what's going on already thanks to thin walls in their home. So had Shirley. And, unfortunately for Colin, so had Rivals. His eyes darted from Naruto to Colin and widened. Wait. Colin looked at him flatly. Don't. Rivals pointed accusingly. You too. Naruto blinked innocently. What about us? You're together. There was a beat of silence. Then Naruto grinned. Colin sighed and muttered, great. Shirley's eyes lit up instantly. Really? Mito smirked. About time someone said it out loud. Colin's face went red. Mito. Naruto, being entirely unhelpful, looked far too pleased with himself. Guess the secret's out. Rivals clutched at his chest in exaggerated agony. This is betrayal. Absolute betrayal. First Lelouch and Shirley get all mysterious and romantic, and now you too. Romantic. Shirley repeated, trying and failing not to smile. Suzaku noticed that and smiled faintly to himself. Then Arthur, who had been prowling the room restlessly, sprang without warning and bit Suzaku on the hand. Ow! Suzaku jerked back in pain while Arthur landed on the table and hissed with all the self-righteous fury of a tiny tyrant. Mito laughed outright. Naruto did too. Even Colin's composure broke for a second. It was in the middle of that laughter that the door slid open. Lelouch stepped in. He was not at the interview, nor had he been anywhere near Millie's unfortunate encounter with Lloyd. Instead, he had come straight here, his eyes scanning the room with unusual intensity. Nunnally? He asked immediately. The laughter died. Suzaku straightened at once. She's not with you. Lelouch's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. No. Naruto's grin vanished. She was resting earlier, Shirley said softly. Lelouch was already turning away, too tense to respond properly. I'll check upstairs. He left almost as quickly as he had come. For a second no one moved. Then Naruto and Suzaku looked at each other. No words passed between them. They didn't need any. Both had seen it, the look on Lelouch's face, the urgency, the wrongness of it. Naruto gave the smallest nod. Suzaku returned it. And then both of them moved after Lelouch. Colin rose halfway from her seat. Naruto. He glanced back only long enough to say, stay here. Then he was gone. Suzaku followed without hesitation. Mito watched them leave, unease creeping over her expression. Something had happened. And whatever it was, it had turned the room cold. Lelouch took the stairs two at a time. By the time Suzaku and Naruto caught up to him near the upper hall, he was standing frozen outside Nunnally's room, one hand clenched so tightly at his side that his knuckles had gone white. Naruto slowed first. Lelouch. Suzaku stepped closer and saw it. A photograph. Nunnally bound and gagged. His blood ran cold. Lelouch's phone rang. He answered immediately. Mao, he said, the name bitten out like poison. Naruto's eyes narrowed sharply. Lelouch listened in silence for a moment, his jaw tightening with every second. CC. Isn't here, he said flatly. If that's what you're after. Then Lelouch's expression darkened even further. He says that's exactly why he took her, he said quietly after lowering the phone. And that he's within 500 meters. Suzaku felt his stomach drop. Naruto's face hardened. How long? Naruto asked. Lelouch stared at the phone like he wanted to crush it. 5 hours. No police. The silence that followed was heavy. Then Suzaku asked, voice low, what's the plan? Lelouch looked between the two of them and, for once, did not answer immediately. Because for all the strategies in his head, none of them mattered more than one fact. Nunnally was in Mao's hands. Elsewhere, Ogi returned home to find the safe house different. Not violated. Not ransacked. Just different. He stepped inside warily, hand already drifting toward his weapon before the smell reached him. Food. Cooked food. He turned the corner into the kitchen and stopped. Valletta, still suffering from the amnesia caused by her wound, stood near the stove looking almost absurdly domestic as she arranged a meal for two. She looked up. Oh, she said. You're back. Ogi stared at her. Then at the food. Then back at her. What are you doing? Valletta frowned slightly, as if the answer should have been obvious. Cooking. You used my food. Yes. Ogi ran a hand over his face. Security cameras were hidden all around the house now, a precaution he had put in place after taking her in, and she had not gone anywhere near outside since realizing they were in Japanese territory. She looked at him for another second, then seemed to relax. Well, she said with a soft sigh, I suppose I got lucky. Ogi blinked. Lucky. Valletta sat down at the table and looked at him with complete sincerity. Yes, she said. At least someone nice found me. And somehow that was more disarming than if she had pulled a gun on him. The moment Lelouch finished the call, the phone nearly cracked in his grip. Nunnally, he breathed. Suzaku stepped closer at once. What happened? Lelouch forced himself to answer, though every instinct in him wanted to tear through the building and rip Mao apart with his bare hands. He has Nunnally, Lelouch said. This person has Nunnally. Naruto's expression sharpened instantly. Where? He says he's within 500 meters, Lelouch replied. And he gave me 5 hours to find her. His jaw tightened. No police. No military. Suzaku frowned. Then we do it ourselves. Lelouch looked at him, surprised by how immediate the answer was. Suzaku met his gaze evenly. I'm helping. Naruto folded his arms. Same. Lelouch exhaled slowly. This has nothing to do with the royal family. Or my gambling. Or anything else. His eyes darkened. This is just a psychopath who wants to keep a girl all to himself. Naruto's brow furrowed. He's after CC, isn't he? Lelouch glanced at him, then away. Yes. But Nunnally is the leverage. Suzaku looked between them. So what's the lead? Lelouch replayed the call in his head. There was running water in the background. He turned sharply. Which means underground. Naruto nodded once. Sewers. Ashford has restricted access routes below the school, Lelouch said, already moving. I can get us down. As the three of them hurried through the student council building, Naruto kept pace easily beside Suzaku. Lelouch led them to a service elevator hidden behind one of the maintenance corridors. He hacked into the control panel with fast, practiced fingers. Suzaku watched him with a raised eyebrow. You really do know your way around these systems. Lelouch didn't look up. I know enough. Naruto smirked faintly. Translation, he's done this before. The elevator doors slid open. The ride down was tense and silent. At the bottom, the doors parted to reveal a dim tunnel opening into the sewer system. And a mounted machine gun waiting for them. It swiveled toward the elevator with a mechanical whine. Lelouch's eyes widened. Get back. But Suzaku and Naruto moved at the same instant. Suzaku kicked off the side of the elevator frame and ran up the wall with terrifying speed. Naruto shot forward low and fast, keeping pace so perfectly it looked rehearsed. The machine gun opened fire. Suzaku leapt. Naruto twisted under the line of bullets, grabbing the base of the turret just as Suzaku's heel smashed into the weapon's side. The impact threw its aim high. Naruto used the momentum of Suzaku's strike to wrench the mount sideways and slam it into the wall hard enough to snap its rotation mechanism. The gun sparked and died. Lelouch stared at the two of them. Suzaku landed in a crouch. Naruto released the twisted gun mount and straightened. Naruto glanced back. You were saying. Lelouch recovered quickly. Move. They ran through the tunnels, following the sound of water and the faint echo of Nunnally's voice. At last they found her, bound to a chair in the center of a maintenance chamber. Nunnally. Lelouch called. Her face lifted immediately. Lelouch. Suzaku rushed forward, then stopped dead. Above Nunnally's head, suspended by a rigged frame, was a motion-sensitive bomb. One wrong movement. One pulled wire. One shift in balance. And the whole thing would go off. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he took in the mechanism. Damn. Suzaku crouched near Nunnally. Nunnally, it's all right. We're here. Suzaku. She said, relief flooding her voice. Naruto too. Yeah, Naruto said gently. We've got you. Lelouch stepped in close, studying the bomb with cold concentration. Don't touch anything yet. Suzaku looked up. Can you disarm it? Lelouch's mind raced over the wiring. Yes, but it's set up to punish the obvious move. He pointed carefully. One of these three stabilizing wires is genuine. The other two are decoys. Cut the wrong one, and the device shifts and detonates. Naruto folded his arms, glaring at the thing. Can't you tell which is which? I can narrow it down, Lelouch said. But not with absolute certainty. Nunnally swallowed. Will it destroy the school? Lelouch went silent. Suzaku understood immediately. It will. A heavy quiet fell over the chamber. Then Suzaku smiled at Nunnally, soft and steady. It'll be okay. Lelouch and I can handle this. Naruto glanced at him, then at Lelouch. You two really have a habit of saying impossible things like they're normal. Lelouch ignored that. Suzaku, stay with her. Naruto, come with me. Naruto looked at him sharply. You found him. No, Lelouch said. But he wants a game. His mouth thinned. Which means he'll be waiting. Naruto's expression hardened. Then let's go. Suzaku turned his head. Be careful. Naruto gave him a quick nod. You too. They found Mao in the chapel. He was sprawled near the altar like he owned the place, one leg stretched out, the other hanging loose, his grin already in place by the time Lelouch and Naruto stepped inside. Candlelight flickered across the broken quiet of the room, throwing long shadows over the pews and the chessboard waiting between them. Well, Mao sang. You brought company. Naruto said nothing. He stopped a few steps behind Lelouch, arms folded, expression cold and unreadable. Mao's smile sharpened the moment he really looked at him. And then it changed. For the first time since they had entered, something real flickered across Mao's face. Fear. Not much. Not enough for Lelouch to notice immediately. But it was there. Because Mao remembered. The mountain path. The fox mask. That monstrous presence in the dark behind those eyes. He saw Naruto standing there beside Lelouch, calm and silent, and a pulse of genuine alarm shot through him before anger followed right behind it. Then Naruto's Sharingan flashed. Brief enough that it could have been mistaken for nothing more than a trick of the chapel light. But Mao felt it. A warning. No tricks. His grin twitched. The message landed so cleanly that, for half a second, Mao almost stepped back without realizing it. Then he caught himself and laughed instead, too loudly, too carelessly. Well, he said, voice bright with strain he hid badly, this just got interesting. Lelouch's stare never wavered. What do you want? Mao spread his arms theatrically. A game, of course. The chessboard was already set before him. Beside it, built into the base of the altar platform, was a delicate scale mechanism linked to a wired trigger. Naruto's gaze shifted to it at once. Bomb control. Mao clapped delightedly. See. He's smart too. Lelouch stepped forward, eyes narrowing. Explain. Mao tapped the board. Simple. We play. Captured pieces go onto the scales. If I take enough, the bomb goes off. If you do, it disarms. His grin widened. Checkmate doesn't matter. Only wait. Naruto muttered under his breath, psycho. Mao laughed again, though there was an edge to it now. Yes, I've heard that one before. Then his eyes slid back toward Naruto. Though I suppose if Lelouch loses, you'll die first. That made both Naruto and Lelouch pause. Mao's grin turned uglier. For taking my CC away. Lelouch's brow creased. Naruto looked faintly disgusted. What the hell are you talking about? Naruto asked flatly. Lelouch looked no less confused, though the tension in his face deepened. He's insane. Ignore him. Mao snickered, though neither of them had missed how unbalanced the comment was, how weirdly personal, how detached from anything that actually made sense. The kind of thing only a madman would say and mean completely. Lelouch sat down at the board. Naruto did not. He moved instead toward the side wall and leaned there with deceptive ease, arms still folded, eyes fixed on Mao the entire time. The game began. And almost immediately, Mao took control of it. He moved fast. Too fast. Countering Lelouch's ideas almost before they fully formed. Every feint was answered. Every line of play was cut off before it could develop. One piece after another vanished from Lelouch's side of the board, and with each capture the scale dipped lower. Closer to detonation. Mao giggled. You always think in layers, Lulu. One part of you judging everyone around you. Another part standing back and judging the first. He moved a bishop with infuriating ease. Very efficient. Very tiresome. Lelouch's jaw tightened. Naruto stayed silent, but his hands slowly curled into fists where his arms rested against his chest. Mao glanced at him again. And you, he said, smile returning in a thin, ugly line. Still quiet. How nice. I suppose even you know this isn't your kind of game. Naruto's eyes narrowed. Keep talking. Mao snickered. Temper. I like that. The scale dipped lower. Lelouch's pieces were vanishing too quickly now. Every move he considered, Mao was already there waiting for it, answering thoughts before they became action. The imbalance was infuriating. Worse than infuriating. Unfair. Which meant Lelouch was certain now. Mao wasn't simply guessing well. He was reading him. Back in the maintenance chamber, Suzaku climbed carefully into position above Nunnally, reaching toward the bomb housing while keeping his breathing steady. Lelouch can do this, Nunnally whispered below him. Suzaku forced a small smile despite the sweat on his brow. Yeah, he said. He can. In Naruto. Suzaku hesitated only a second. He'll help. Nunnally's face softened. Then I'm not scared. Suzaku looked away for just a moment, swallowing hard, then forced his focus back onto the bomb. In the chapel, Mao took another piece. The scale dipped lower. Lelouch could feel the match slipping out of his hands. Across the room, Naruto pushed off the wall just slightly. Lelouch. I know. Mao laughed, the sound shrill and ugly in the candlelit quiet. Do you? He asked. Because from where I'm sitting, you're finished. Lelouch stared at the board. Then, all at once, his shoulders sagged. Fine, he said. Mao went still. For a heartbeat, he just stared. Then he broke into delighted applause. There it is. Finally. The real you. Lelouch kept his head bowed. Mao reached for the final piece. And in the maintenance chamber, Suzaku cut the wire. Nothing happened. The bomb powered down with a soft mechanical click. Nunnally let out a shaking, breathless sob of relief. At the exact same instant, Mao's hand stopped above the board. The scale didn't move. His grin vanished. What? The stained glass window behind him exploded inward. Suzaku came through it in a blur, crashing into Mao hard enough to send them both skidding across the chapel floor. The chessboard overturned, pieces scattering everywhere. Naruto moved at the same time. He intercepted Mao's fallen gun before the other man could grab it, kicking it aside in one smooth motion. By the time Mao managed to scramble half upright, Naruto had already planted a foot on one of his arms and pinned him to the floor. Mao stared up wildly. How? Suzaku, breathing hard, answered through clenched teeth. Because Lelouch told me what to do. Lelouch straightened slowly. Only then did the memory return. The mirror. The Geass. He had commanded himself to forget the exact instruction he had already given Suzaku, what wire to cut, when to cut it, so Mao would never be able to pull the answer out of his thoughts. Mao looked between them in disbelief. You. Then his face twisted. And he laughed. It came out broken and jagged this time, but no less vicious. You father killer, he hissed at Suzaku. Everything stopped. Suzaku froze. Lelouch's eyes widened. Naruto's head snapped toward Mao, and the look on his face turned instantly murderous. Mao grinned up at Suzaku, blood on his teeth, madness blazing in his eyes. 7 years ago, you stabbed your own father because you thought surrender would save lives. Genbu Kururugi wanted to keep fighting. You wanted it all to stop. So you killed him. His voice rose with ugly delight. And now all this righteousness is just you trying to scrub your soul clean. Stop, Suzaku whispered. Naruto took one step toward Mao. Mao only laughed harder. That's what all this is, isn't it? Reform, justice, saving everyone, just a selfish little penance for murdering your father. Suzaku made a raw, broken sound and dropped to his knees. Naruto moved without thinking. He caught Mao by the collar and slammed him down hard against the chapel floor. Shut up, Naruto said, his voice low and shaking with fury. Mao stared up at him and grinned. And then his expression sharpened. That ugly, frantic light in his eyes turned into something more dangerous. Oh, Mao breathed. I know you're hiding something too. Naruto's grip tightened. Mao's grin widened. Should I say it? He taunted, his voice dripping with delight. Should I tell them who you really are? Should I tell them Madara is? Naruto's eye changed. The Mangekyo Sharingan spun into place. He was already reaching for it, already ready to bury the words before they could leave Mao's mouth. And then his vision went black. The world lurched sideways into darkness for one sickening instant, and Naruto's hand faltered. His grip loosened. Mao felt it immediately. With a desperate burst of strength, he tore himself free and rolled backward across the floor. Lelouch saw the whole thing happen. And moved before Mao could recover. His Geass flared. Be silent. Mao's eyes widened in shock. His mouth opened, and no sound came out. For the first time since they had met him, Mao looked truly afraid. He clutched at his throat, panic flashing across his face, then scrambled to his feet and bolted for the chapel doors. Naruto started after him instinctively, then stopped. Because Suzaku had collapsed further in on himself, shaking where he knelt, broken open by the truth Mao had dragged into the light. Lelouch had seen it too. The two boys looked at each other for one brief, wordless moment. Naruto stayed. Lelouch ran. Outside the chapel, Mao stumbled into the light, and straight into CC. She stood waiting for him with a pistol in her hand, her face unreadable in the dark. Mao's eyes widened with desperate, voiceless relief. CC looked at him for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice soft. I did love you. Mao froze. Her expression shifted, becoming something quieter. Sadder. So wait for me in C's world. The shot, silenced and small, was almost gentle. Mao dropped. By the time Lelouch reached the doorway and saw the body, it was already over. He turned his head back toward the chapel. Inside, Suzaku was still on his knees, shattered by the truth Mao had torn out of him. Naruto was beside him now, one hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. And because Suzaku hadn't looked up even once, he had seen none of what happened outside. The silence after Mao's death felt heavier than the shot that had ended him. The chapel was dim, broken, and full of shattered color from the stained glass window Suzaku had crashed through. Fragments glittered across the floor in the weak light. Nunnally had already been taken somewhere safe, and for the moment only the three of them remained there. Suzaku was still on his knees. His breathing came unevenly. His hands shook where they hung at his sides, and he looked like a person who had been split open and did not yet know how to put himself back together. Mao's words had not just hurt him. They had reached into something old and buried and dragged it into the light. For once, Lelouch did not know what to say. Naruto broke the silence first. Suzaku. Suzaku didn't look up. Lelouch swallowed, then forced himself to ask the question hanging over all of them. Is it true? He asked quietly. Did you really kill your father? Suzaku's shoulders tensed. He said nothing. That was answer enough. Lelouch shut his eyes for a brief second. Then Kirihara lied, he murmured. Or at least, he chose the version of the story he wanted remembered. Suzaku let out a bitter, broken laugh. I didn't mean, he stopped, his throat tightening uselessly around the words. I thought if the fighting stopped, fewer people would die. Naruto looked down at him, his expression softer than either of them expected. My dad knew, he said. Suzaku's head jerked up. What? Naruto held his gaze. My dad knew. For a long time. Suzaku stared at him, stunned. Your father knew. His voice came out hoarse. Then why? He stopped, then pushed harder. Why didn't Minato-san or Kushina-san ever say anything? Why didn't you tell me you knew? Then another thought hit him. Does Mito know? Naruto shook his head immediately. No. Mito doesn't know. Suzaku looked even more lost now, hurt layering over the shock already on his face. Then why keep it from me? Naruto crouched so he was more level with him. Because none of us blamed you, he said simply. Suzaku went still. Naruto continued before he could say anything. Not my dad. Not my mom. Not me. His voice stayed steady. And we never will. Suzaku stared at him like he couldn't make sense of what he was hearing. Naruto's expression tightened, but not with anger. You were a kid, Suzaku, he said. A scared kid who thought he was doing the right thing. He leaned forward a little. That doesn't make what happened stop hurting. It doesn't erase it. But it also doesn't make you some monster who deserves to carry it alone forever. Suzaku's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Lelouch looked between them in silence, caught off guard by how calm Naruto sounded, by how certain he was. Naruto exhaled softly. My parents figured it out because they knew you. And because after it happened, you were never really the same. He paused. They kept it to themselves because they thought dragging it back into the open would only make it worse for you. Suzaku looked down again, eyes burning. All this time, he whispered. Naruto nodded once. All this time. Lelouch stepped a little closer. You kept it buried because you thought you had to, he said quietly. Suzaku laughed again, shaky and miserable. It wasn't just that. I was afraid. He squeezed his eyes shut. If people knew, if the Japanese knew, if anyone knew, his hands clenched hard. I thought maybe I could make up for it somehow. If I saved enough people. If I did enough good. Naruto's expression shifted with something close to painful understanding. Yeah, he said softly. I know. For a while, none of them spoke. Then Lelouch said, keeping it secret was probably necessary. At the time, it may have been the only way Japan didn't break apart completely in the middle of the invasion. Suzaku looked at him sharply, then away again. That doesn't make it better. No, Lelouch admitted. It doesn't. Naruto stood and held out a hand. After a few seconds, Suzaku took it. Naruto pulled him to his feet without saying anything else. Suzaku still looked wrecked, but at least he was standing now. At least he no longer looked like he might simply collapse and never get back up. We should go, Naruto said at last. Lelouch nodded. But before they moved, the question that had been tugging at him since the struggle forced its way out. He looked at Naruto. Why did you let Mao get free? Naruto blinked, then frowned slightly. I didn't mean to. Lelouch studied him. Naruto looked irritated with himself now, like the answer bothered him too. I had him, he said. I was going to stop him from saying anything else, and then, he hesitated, pressing a hand briefly to one eye. I don't know. It was like I couldn't see for a second. Lelouch's expression changed. What? Naruto looked away, annoyed. Just for a moment. Everything went dark. He gave a small shake of his head. It's happened before. Lelouch went very still. He looked at Naruto more carefully then, really looked and for the first time noticed something he should have seen sooner. Naruto's eyes looked duller than they used to. Not enough that most people would have caught it. Not enough to be obvious. But enough that now, once he saw it, he couldn't unsee it. Something cold settled in Lelouch's chest. His Geass. Was it possible there was a secret condition that if some could refuse the command that they lose their sight, was it his fault? He said none of it aloud. He only looked away before the worry on his face could become too obvious. Naruto let out a quiet breath through his nose. It passed, he said. That's all. Lelouch nodded once, though the motion felt stiff. I see. He did not sound convinced, even to himself. No one mentioned it again after that. No one mentioned CC. Waiting outside. No one mentioned Mao's last words or how close they had all come to something even worse. And no one said aloud how much had just changed between them. But when they finally left the chapel together, Lelouch carried more than Suzaku's confession with him. He carried the image of Naruto's eyes. And the quiet, growing fear that his friend was starting to lose something he could never afford to lose. The next morning at the in Ashford's art department, Lelouch stood very still on a raised platform, doing his best to look like a solemn sculpture and not a teenager being forced into nonsense. He was posing as the thinker. He hated it. Around him, students sat at easels and sketchpads, trying to capture the assigned statues and living poses that had been arranged for Clovis's absurd, Art Week, initiative. Rivals, Shirley, Nina, Colin, Suzaku, Mito, and Naruto were all there among the others, spread out through the room. Lelouch's eyes drifted just slightly toward Suzaku. Suzaku noticed. And for a second, an entire conversation passed between them in silence. Then Rivals ruined it. Lelouch. He hissed. Stop moving. Lelouch gave him a flat stare. I barely twitched. You twitched enough, Rivals said, marching up to him with all the confidence of a man who should not have been trusted with anything. He adjusted Lelouch's shoulders, tilted his chin, then horribly shifted his mouth upward into the faintest smile. There, Rivals said proudly. Much better. Lelouch's eye twitched. From her seat, Shirley frowned immediately. That's not the pose, she said. It's my artistic interpretation, Rivals replied. It looks ridiculous, Colin muttered. Nina, glancing up from her paper, gave a small nod of agreement. Nearby, Shirley lowered her pencil and looked more closely at Lelouch. You're moving too much, she said, half chastising him. Lelouch let out a quiet sigh. Yes, dear, he grumbled. That drew a laugh from Shirley before she could stop herself. Across the room, Colin had turned toward Naruto only to catch him snickering into his hand. Her eyes narrowed at once. Why are you laughing? She asked. Naruto immediately straightened. Because unlike Lelouch, Naruto had been placed on another platform and told to pose as Apollo. Which, to his endless irritation, meant standing around looking noble while half the room kept glancing at him like this was somehow the best day of their lives. Colin folded her arms. You know you're next, right? Naruto's smile died. He looked toward the instructor, then back to Colin, and muttered, yes, dear. That got a louder laugh out of her than she had intended, and even Mito smiled as she kept sketching. Shirley looked between the two couples and shook her head fondly. Nina, after watching the exchange for a moment, leaned toward Shirley. Weren't we supposed to have math this week? Shirley smiled faintly and kept sketching. Not this week. Clovis declared it art week before. She trailed off, then shrugged gently. So apparently we're all suffering for culture instead. Later that same day, the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Clovis Memorial Museum of Art was underway. Princess Euphemia moved slowly through the exhibit hall, her escorts close behind her, while various paintings and drawings were displayed for her judgment. She stopped in front of one painting, the village which depicted two jungle huts surrounded by rich green foliage. There was something hauntingly alive about it, something far more honest than the stiff propaganda pieces filling most of the hall. This one is lovely, Yuffie said softly. One of her escorts glanced at the card and immediately stiffened. Your Highness, that one is not eligible. Yuffie blinked. Why? The artist is 1/4 Her expression changed at once. Then why display it at all? She asked quietly. The escort hesitated. To appease the populace. Yuffie looked back at the painting for a long moment. Then she said, that seems cruel. The escort tried to redirect her. Perhaps your highness would prefer one of the portraits of his majesty. Yuffie said nothing, but the displeasure on her face was clear enough. At the Black Knight's headquarters, Ogi had barely stepped inside before stopping dead. Valletta had made octopus-shaped hot dogs. They were arranged neatly on a plate in front of him, and the sight of them was absurdly domestic. Valletta, still suffering from amnesia, looked up at him from the small kitchen area. You're back. Ogi stared at the plate, then at her. You made dinner. Valletta tilted her head. Yes. Then, after a beat, was I not supposed to? Ogi rubbed the back of his neck. No, it's not that. It's just. Before he could finish, the door opened and Inoue strode in. Ogi. He turned at once, face sobering. What happened? The 4 holy swords are here, Inoue said. Something went wrong. A few minutes later, the surviving members stood before them and explained. Britannian forces had intercepted them. Toto had stayed behind. He had allowed himself to be captured so the others could escape. Ogi's face tightened. Damn it. He reached for the phone almost immediately. When Lelouch answered, Ogi wasted no time relaying the situation. Zero listened in silence, then said, we're breaking him out. Ogi blinked. Immediately. Yes. Lelouch's voice was calm, decisive. Tell Diethard to make preparations. After the call ended, C disguised as an Ashford student, stepped into the room. I'm sorry about the Chinese Federation meeting, she said. Lelouch barely glanced at her. It's already handled. Then he turned back to the screen in front of him, thoughts moving rapidly ahead. Toto, he murmured. The 4 holy swords. Suzaku. His eyes darkened thoughtfully. 3 pieces, he said. And I need all of them in play. At Ashford, far away from the Black Knights and rescue plans, Suzaku was once again at a sink scrubbing hateful graffiti from his shirt. And somewhere in the art room, Naruto was still being forced to play Apollo while Colin tried not to laugh at him too obviously. Cornelia stood by the tall window in the Viceroy's office, one hand resting lightly on the hilt of her sword as Guilford finished delivering his report. Toto is scheduled for execution, he said formally. Cornelia did not even blink. There is no need for me to oversee it personally, she replied. The Japan Liberation Front is finished. Her violet eyes narrowed slightly. Have him see to it. Yes, Your Highness. Before Guilford could continue, the doors opened and Euphemia stepped into the office, her expression more troubled than usual. Sister, Euphi said as she came closer, there's unrest spreading across several sectors. Cornelia turned toward her younger sister, and instead of looking concerned, she looked almost energized by the news. Then we move quickly and use it, she said. If disorder is spreading, then it gives us the perfect chance to tighten Britannia's grip and reclaim more territory before any real resistance can reorganize. Euphi's face fell. Cornelia. But Cornelia had already made her decision. I'll be leaving to handle it myself, she said. Then she looked toward Darlton, who stood nearby. While I'm gone, Euphemia will remain in charge. Darlton bowed at once. Understood, Your Highness. Cornelia then turned back to Euphemia and held out a small booklet. Euphi looked down at it in confusion before taking it. What is this? Cornelia's expression remained perfectly composed. It's the expanded list, she said. The same one you were looking through before. Suitable candidates to serve as your knight. Euphi opened it and glanced over the names. Almost immediately, her expression shifted. All nobles, she said quietly. As they should be, Cornelia replied without hesitation. Euphi said nothing after that, but the slight tightening around her eyes made her feelings clear enough. Later, in the quiet warmth of the student council building, Suzaku sat with Lelouch and Nunnally at a small table set with tea and light snacks. The calmness of the setting stood in sharp contrast to almost everything else happening in Area 11. Suzaku had relaxed enough to smile as he described one of his old childhood habits. We used to catch crayfish in the pond, he said. Zaragani. I was terrible at it at first. Nunnally laughed softly. Really? That sounds hard. It was, Suzaku admitted. But once you learn how patient you have to be, it gets easier. Lelouch watched him over the rim of his teacup, thoughtful. More and more, one idea had been repeating in his mind. With everything that kept happening, Mao, the Black Knights, the instability around Nunnally, she would eventually need a knight of her own. And if he had any say in that choice, there was really only one person he trusted enough. Before he could say any of that, though, Nunnally tilted her head slightly toward Suzaku. Suzaku. Yes. How do you feel about Mito? Suzaku nearly choked on his tea. Lelouch lowered his cup very slowly. Suzaku coughed once into his hand, face warming. Why do you want to know that? Nunnally smiled faintly, innocent in tone but far too direct in intent. Because Mito is my best friend. I think of her as another sister. Her expression softened. And I want both of you to be happy. Suzaku went very still. For a second, he looked almost helplessly toward Lelouch, who offered no rescue at all and instead looked far too entertained by this development. Suzaku scratched his cheek awkwardly. That's a difficult question. Nunnally folded her hands neatly in her lap. Is it? Yes, Suzaku said at once, to both siblings' amusement. After a moment, he exhaled. I care about her. A lot. His voice lowered a little. More than I probably meant to. Nunnally's smile widened. Lelouch hid his own reaction behind another sip of tea. Before Nunnally could pursue the subject any further, footsteps approached. Cecile appeared in the doorway. Suzaku, she said apologetically, I'm afraid duty calls. Suzaku sighed under his breath. Of course it does. He rose from his seat, but before he could leave, Lelouch spoke. Suzaku. Suzaku paused. Yes. There's a favor I want to ask you later. Suzaku blinked. A favor. Lelouch only nodded once. Later. Suzaku studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod in return. All right. After he left, Lelouch looked toward Nunnally. Well? He asked. Nunnally turned her face toward him, still smiling. I adore Suzaku. Lelouch smirked faintly. Not more than me, I hope. Nunnally laughed softly. No. Not more than you. Elsewhere, Shirley was in her room getting ready to head out with Sophie, though her thoughts were not entirely on the outing itself. She had been thinking, more than once, about calling Lelouch and asking him on a date. Just the thought of it made her cheeks warm. Maybe something simple. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere that wasn't school or chaos or one of Millie's strange events. As she was gathering her things, her hairclip slipped from her fingers and fell between two drawers. Oh, come on. She crouched and reached down, fingers searching blindly until they brushed metal and paper. Shirley froze. Slowly, she pulled both objects free. The clip. And the note. Her note. The one she had written before. The sight of it made her heartbeat stumble. At the press conference ahead of the museum ceremony, Euphemia stood beside Darlton as flashes went off and reporters competed for attention. One reporter rose first. Your Highness, were any 11s involved in the construction of the museum? Before Euphy could answer, Darlton stepped in. We do not have complete records on every labor contribution, he said smoothly. Another reporter called out, Princess Euphemia, have you chosen your knight yet? One of the escorts near the podium moved to shut the question down, but another voice cut in before he could. More importantly, a different reporter said, is it true you've grown especially close to Naruto Namikaze of the Namikaze Corporation? That caused a stir immediately. Another reporter piled on. Have the two of you been meeting privately outside official reconstruction business? Is the Namikaze Corporation becoming politically tied to the sub-viceroy's office? Is there any truth to rumors of a personal relationship? Yuffie's cheeks pinked instantly, but she straightened. My work with Naruto Namikaze has been focused on the reconstruction efforts, she said carefully. He has been of great help to the people of Area 11, and I respect him very much. That did not satisfy them in the slightest. So you deny a personal attachment? Darlton stepped in more firmly this time. Questions are to remain relevant to the museum and the reconstruction project. Nothing further on that subject. The reporters grumbled, but the point had been made. Yuffie kept her expression composed, though inwardly she was mortified. At the Black Knight's base, preparations for the next operation had hit a wall. Or more specifically, the repair work on the Gurren had. Tamaki was loudly making his displeasure everyone's problem. How is it taking this long? He shouted. It's one nightmare. One of the mechanics glared at him. Then you fix it. Tamaki pointed accusingly at the partially repaired machine. I'm just saying if it was working already, we'd be in better shape. The four holy swords, standing off to the side, watched the disorder with varying levels of skepticism. This is the group we're trusting. One of them muttered. Another crossed his arms. We'll decide what to think after we see the outcome. Before Tamaki could start again, a new voice cut across the room. Take proper care with her. Everyone turned. A woman with golden hair, dark skin, and amused turquoise eyes stood at the entrance as though she had been there all along. Tamaki blinked. Who the hell are you? The woman smiled faintly. Rakshata Chala. She tilted her head toward the Gurren. It's mother. That shut Tamaki up. A moment later, Zero arrived. Rakshata, he said. Zero, she returned lazily. I came expecting to see two machines. Zero tilted his head slightly. Two. Rakshata looked genuinely puzzled. Yes. The Gurren, and the Izanagi. Her gaze moved over the gathered Black Knights. Why isn't the Izanagi here? The room went dead silent. Colin's eyes widened. Tamaki frowned. The what? Rakshata arched a brow. The Izanagi. Madara's personal nightmare. She sounded almost surprised they needed it explained. I built it. Or rather, I helped bring it into existence. Her expression sharpened slightly. I was under the impression Madara was working with the Black Knights. That revelation hit the room like a bomb. Hold on, Tamaki said, staring. You built that monster. Rakshata smiled faintly. He's not a monster. He's elegant. Colin was still staring. Madara's nightmare. Built by Rakshata. And Rakshata had thought he was with them. Zero said nothing for a moment, though under the mask Lelouch's mind was already moving rapidly. Interesting. Very interesting. Rakshata, apparently unconcerned by the shock she had caused, gestured for a pair of sealed cases to be brought forward. I also brought improved protective pilot suits, she said. Less efficient in movement, perhaps, but considerably better for surviving things you'd normally die in. She looked directly at Colin when she said it. Colin stepped forward and took the offered case silently, still processing everything she had just heard. Somewhere in the back of her mind, only one thought stood out clearly. If Rakshata built the Izanagi, then just how deep does all of this go? The execution platform was cold, metallic, and insultingly clean. Toto stood in chains beneath the watch of Britannian soldiers, his expression unreadable as one of the guards stepped closer. The viceroy said he would handle it, the guard said. Toto lifted his head slightly. The guard smirked. The new executioner. A few moments later, Suzaku Kururugi stepped into view. Toto's eyes widened only slightly. Suzaku looked worse. He stood there in uniform, stiff-backed and pale, staring at the man who had once taught him how to hold a sword, how to breathe through fear, how to move with purpose. The paperwork Lloyd had shoved into his hands still felt unreal. This has to be some kind of joke, Lloyd muttered from nearby, flipping through the order sheet with open disbelief. What sort of lunatic bureaucracy puts him in charge of an execution? Cecile frowned. Lloyd. No, really. This is absurd. Suzaku barely heard them. His eyes remained fixed on Toto. And for a brief moment, memory pulled him backward. The Kururugi estate training yard. Suzaku was younger then, smaller, soaked in sweat and stubbornness as he gripped a wooden practice sword with both hands. Toto stood across from him, calm and unyielding. You're hesitating again, Toto said. Suzaku scowled. I'm not. You are. Another voice had cut in from the side. Suzaku always hesitates right before he gets hit. Naruto, younger and grinning, leaned on the fence while Mito stood beside him with her arms folded. That's because he actually thinks before swinging, Mito shot back. Naruto put a hand over his chest. So I don't think. No, Mito and Suzaku answered together. Toto had actually smiled at that. Again, he ordered, turning back to Suzaku. And this time, commit. The memory shattered with the sound of an explosion. The entire execution site shook. Alarms blared instantly. Lloyd brightened at once. Oh. Well then, I suppose that freezes from the paperwork. Sutherland's moved into formation as smoke and debris rolled across the outer perimeter. Then, through the haze, the new Gekka units of the Four Holy Swords descended into battle, cutting through the Britannian line with ruthless precision. One of the guards nearest Toto panicked immediately and raised his rifle. Damn terrorists, if I kill him now at least. He never finished. The Gurren burst through the smoke like a crimson comet and crushed him before he could pull the trigger. Zero's Barai followed close behind. The battlefield tilted all at once in the Black Knight's favor. Zero came to a stop in front of Toto. General Toto. Toto looked at him evenly. Have you come for another miracle? No, Zero replied. I came for your strength. Toto's expression did not change. My loyalty died with General Kates. I have no reason to keep living. Zero took a step closer. Then die after you've accomplished something worthy of your reputation. That drew a reaction. The Four Holy Swords glanced toward Zero. Toto's eyes narrowed. What did you say? Zero's voice sharpened. You won a single glorious battle and then let yourself become a symbol instead of a weapon. The only reason Japan's resistance has lasted as long as it has is because surrender left room for people like you to keep fighting. And yet you would throw that away now. Toto stared at him. Zero continued relentlessly. Take responsibility for the fact that you won. Fight until your name means nothing because victory has become ordinary. Fight until Japan's dreams are no longer dreams. For the first time since his capture, something like life returned to Toto's face. Then, slowly, he smiled. At the Clovis Memorial Museum of Art, the atmosphere could not have been more different. Elegant lighting, quiet music, crowds in formal clothes, cameras and polished floors and the scent of flowers. Euphemia stood near the display platform where the winning piece was to be selected, Darlton and her escort not far from her side. In the audience, Minato and Kushina Namikaze stood with Mito, having come to support the gallery event and, perhaps more importantly, to keep an eye on things after how unstable Area 11 had become. Mito's gaze wandered the room with mild suspicion. Kushina leaned closer to Minato. Too many politicians. Not enough exits. Minato smiled faintly. You say that everywhere. Because it's usually true. Before Euphemia could choose the winning painting, several of the reporters surged forward again. Princess Euphemia. Your Highness, one question. Darlton moved to cut them off, but Yuffie lifted a hand gently. It's all right. One reporter rose first. Princess Euphemia, how would you describe your relationship with Naruto Namikaze of the Namikaze Corporation? That caused a stir at once. Mito's eyes widened. Kushina went still. Minato's expression remained calm, though more attentive now. Yuffie blinked. Naruto and I are friends. We've worked closely on reconstruction efforts. That did nothing to slow the questions. How close are the two of you outside official work? Is there a personal attachment between the sub-viceroy and the heir of Namikaze Corporation? Are marriage rumors already being discussed within Britannian circles? Mito nearly choked. Kushina made a strangled sound that might have become laughter if she weren't trying to remain dignified. Minato rubbed at his temple. Darlton stepped in sharply. Questions will remain relevant to the museum. The reporters grumbled, but before the moment could settle, every phone in the room began ringing at once. Darlton answered his first. His expression changed immediately. What? Euphemia turned toward him. What happened? Darlton lowered the phone slowly. Toto. Back on the battlefield, the chains were off, the Gekka units were active, and the fight had fully begun. Zero personally escorted Toto to the custom machine prepared for him. One of the four holy swords glanced at him sharply. You trust him that easily? Zero didn't look back. I trust results. Toto climbed into the cockpit and gave the machine a brief, appraising look. You came prepared. Zero's voice stayed calm. I rarely do otherwise. Then the warning came over comms. Lancelot incoming. Suzaku entered the battle like a streak of white fire. He tore straight through the front line, forcing the Black Knights to scatter and regroup on instinct. The four holy swords moved to intercept him together, and while they managed to pressure him, none of them could land a decisive blow. At the museum, the battle was already being displayed on the large screens. A wave of gasps spread through the crowd. Is that the Lancelot? Who's piloting it? Euphemia stepped closer without even realizing she'd moved. Back on the battlefield, Rakshata's voice crackled through the Black Knight's communications. The Gekka units can keep up, but only if the support computer stays stable. Tamaki shouted back immediately, then keep it stable. Zero, however, was watching Suzaku's movements with unnerving concentration. I know that rhythm, he murmured. That timing. Colin turned toward him. Zero. Feed this pattern to the holy swords, he ordered. He always shifts right after the second feint. Force him left and cut the angle. They followed the instructions. And it worked. For the first time, the Lancelot was pressed hard enough to give ground. Toto came in fast, his blade flashing, and with one clean strike he sheared away the upper shielding of the Lancelot's cockpit. The pilot's face became visible. Colin froze. Zero said nothing. Toto's eyes widened. Suzaku. At the museum, the room erupted in shock. Euphemia's hand flew to her mouth. Mito stared. Kushina's brows shot up. Well. Minato folded his arms. That explains a few things. On the battlefield, Colin found her voice first. The Lancelot pilot is Suzaku. Zero remained silent for one dangerous second too long. Then a new signal hit the battlefield. Another nightmare frame descended into the combat zone. The Izanagi. Shock rippled through both sides. Madara. Madara's here. The Izanagi didn't waste a second. Its back-mounted flight module flared to life, and the machine surged through the air with brutal speed, dropping into the Britannian line like a blade from the sky. It hit the ground in a burst of force, drew both MVS Kodachi in the same motion, and cut through the first Sutherland before the pilot inside fully understood what had happened. Another one turned toward it, but was too slow. The Izanagi's wrist ports opened, and a pair of Horizon-shaped MVS kunai launched forward on their nearly indestructible cables. One punched clean through a Sutherland's torso. The other pinned a second unit through the shoulder before the cable boosters reeled both weapons back in a blur of sparks and torn metal. The machine never stopped moving. It twisted sideways as rifle fire converged, and for one impossible second the incoming shots passed straight through it as though the nightmare had become a shadow. The Izanagi phased through the barrage, re-solidified at full speed, and drove one Kodachi up through the chest of another Sutherland. It ripped the blade free, spun, and slammed a palm emitter blast into a fourth machine hard enough to send it crashing across the ruined ground. On the museum screens, the crowd gasped all over again. What is that? How is it doing that? He went through the shots. The Izanagi shot upward again on its flight joints, cutting across the battlefield and dropping back down near Todo's position, carving open a path through the units pressing hardest against him. Todo's eyes narrowed. Why? The Izanagi came alongside his unit only briefly, just long enough for Madara's voice to come across the comms. I'm here to repay a debt. Todo frowned. A debt? There was no explanation. The Izanagi was already moving again before he could ask more, diving back into the Britannian line and opening space for the Black Knight's retreat. Suzaku saw all of it. And Madara, of all people, fighting to secure their escape. Then Todo pressed his own attack hard enough to force Suzaku back. The two machines came to a halt across a strip of ruined ground, facing one another. You, Todo said, his voice carrying over the comms, are Genbu Kururugi's son. Suzaku tightened his grip on the controls. And you're still fighting for a dead dream. Todo's gaze hardened. If you truly believe reform can come from within, then see it through. But understand this, such a path demands everything. Country. Comrades. Yourself. Suzaku inhaled sharply. If that's what it takes, I will. From nearby, Madara's voice cut in, low and almost thoughtful. It seems you're following true to your word, Suzaku Kururugi. Colin's eyes widened. She recognized it immediately. It was a reference to that earlier night, to Suzaku's choice, to the path he had declared he would walk. Suzaku had heard it too. His expression shifted, if only slightly. But Britannian reinforcements were already closing in, and the Black Knights had no room left to hold the field. Retreat. Zero ordered at last. The holy swords moved immediately. Todo pulled back. Colin disengaged reluctantly. The Izanagi shot through the smoke once more, flight module flaring as it cut down another advancing Sutherland with a clean slash from one Kodachi, then phased through a counterattack that should have caught it from behind. Then, without warning, Naruto's vision blurred. The battlefield lurched. The screens in the cockpit smeared for a heartbeat, then another. The delay was tiny, but in a battle like this, tiny was enough. One of the surviving Sutherlands saw the opening and charged in fast, combat knife raised, aiming straight for the Izanagi's cockpit. Naruto tried to react but was too slow. Then the Gurren slammed in from the side and drove the attacking Sutherland away before the blade could land. The red machine's strike sent it crashing across the ground in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. Colin's voice snapped over the comms at once. Madara. Are you alright? Naruto forced his vision back into focus, jaw tightening. I'm fine, he replied. It wasn't a discussion. Before Colin could say anything else, the Izanagi rose on its flight module again, vanished into the smoke, and was gone. At the museum, outrage exploded from the crowd. He let them go. They were 11s. He could have won. Euphemia had heard enough. Before Darlton could stop her, she stepped forward. Her voice rang clear across the museum hall. Then hear me. The crowd fell silent. Yuffie stood straight, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. From this day forward, she declared, Suzaku Kururugi will be my knight. The room erupted. Darlton stared. Reporters nearly trampled one another trying to move closer. Mito's mouth fell open. Kushina blinked. Even Minato looked genuinely surprised. But Euphemia wasn't finished. Her face flushed, but she lifted her chin anyway. And while I'm speaking plainly, she said, her voice softer now but no less clear, I am in love Naruto Namikaze with all my heart. That stunned the room into a deeper, stranger silence. Mito's head snapped toward Minato and Kushina. Kushina looked absolutely poleaxed. Minato, somehow, still remained upright and composed, though only barely. Then Kushina whispered, oh my god. Mito pointed mutely toward the front of the room, still too shocked for words. Darlton looked as though he had just been informed the sky was falling. And Euphemia, cheeks burning but posture unbroken, stood by every word. Back at the Black Knight's base, the retreat had succeeded. The damage was being assessed, the holy swords were regrouping, and Toto stood apart in grim thought. But Zero was gone. Ogi, Colin said, striding toward him. Where is he? Ogi frowned. He stepped away right after we got back. Colin's phone rang. She answered immediately. What came through the line made her blood run cold. Laughter. Delirious, unrestrained, almost manic laughter. Zero. Colin said sharply. But it was Lelouch's voice only in the loosest sense, frayed by something she had never heard from him before. Above him, in the shadows of the upper level, CC stood looking down in silence. Colin lowered the phone slowly, dread crawling through her chest. Something had broken. And whatever it was, it had broken deep. The Izanagi dropped hard onto the service platform, metal groaning as the landing struts took the weight. Steam hissed from the vents along its frame, and for a few seconds the entire station was filled with the low hum of cooling systems and fading power. Naruto didn't wait. The cockpit opened, and he jumped down to the floor below, boots hitting the metal walkway with a sharp clang. He ripped his helmet off, breathing hard, his pulse still carrying the echo of the battlefield with it. Then his vision blurred again. The station lights smeared. The edges of the world darkened for half a second, then snapped back just enough to leave him dizzy and furious. Naruto stopped cold. His hand clenched so hard his knuckles popped, and then he drove his fist into the nearest wall. The steel plating dented under the impact with a loud, violent bang. What the hell is happening to me? He shouted. The words echoed through the empty station. For one long second, there was nothing. Then Kurama's voice rolled through his mind, low and heavy. You're going blind. Naruto froze. The anger drained out of him so fast it almost left him cold. What? Kurama didn't answer immediately. Naruto turned inward at once, and in the space of the seal he found the great fox watching him in silence, red eyes steady and grim. Naruto stared at him. What do you mean, I'm going blind? Kurama's expression did not change. I mean exactly what I said. Naruto took a step closer to the bars. No, he said, sharper now, refusing it before the truth could settle. No. Explain it properly. Kurama let out a low breath through his nose. It's the price of those cursed eyes of yours. The Mangekyo Sharingan. Naruto went still. Kurama's voice stayed flat, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in it now. The Mangekyo Sharingan drains an enormous amount of chakra. It puts severe strain on the eyes and the body every time it's used. His gaze sharpened. And that burden is worse for you than it would be for a true Uchiha. Naruto said nothing. Somewhere deep down, part of him had already known this wasn't normal. The pain, the blurring, the dark spots creeping in at the edge of his sight. He just hadn't wanted to name it. Kurama continued. The more the Mangekyo is used, the more the user's eyesight deteriorates. Little by little. Until eventually, he paused. There is nothing left to deteriorate. Naruto's throat tightened. Blindness, Kurama said. That is the fate waiting at the end of it. The words landed like a blow. Naruto looked away for a second, jaw clenching hard enough to hurt. His mind should have gone to battle first. To the Izanagi. To his enemies. To what losing his sight would mean in a fight. Instead, one thought hit him so fast and so hard it almost took the air out of him. Colin. The way she looked at him when she was annoyed. The way her expression softened when she forgot to guard it. The slight flush in her cheeks. Her eyes. The idea of not being able to see her again, not really see her, made something cold and awful open up in his chest. Naruto's hand tightened against the bars of the seal. Number. Kurama watched him without speaking. Naruto forced himself to look back up. You're telling me I could lose my sight because of the Mangekyo? Yes. And you knew. Kurama's ears twitched slightly, but his stare never wavered. I knew the damage was building. Naruto's eyes widened. And you didn't tell me. I was trying to slow it down. That stopped him. Kurama's voice lowered. I've been doing what I can to repair the damage every time it worsens. Healing what I can. Holding it back where I can. But you keep pushing the Mangekyo harder. His lip curled faintly. Too hard. Too often. Naruto thought of Kamui. Of Amaterasu. Of every fight where the Mangekyo had become his answer before anything else. He thought of the battlefield earlier. Of the blur. Of the darkness swallowing his sight for that split second. Of how close that had come to killing him. And how close he had come to not seeing Colin's face again after seeing her at school. His stomach twisted. Can anything be done? He asked, the question coming out rougher than he wanted. Tell me the truth. Kurama was silent for a moment. Yes. But not quickly. Naruto's breath caught. I can repair the damage, Kurama said. Slowly. Over time. I can keep feeding chakra into the damage and force your eyes to recover. Naruto latched onto that immediately. Then do it. Kurama's gaze hardened. I said slowly. Naruto stopped. Kurama leaned closer to the bars. And while I repair it, you cannot use the Mangekyo Sharingan at all. The words hit almost as hard as the first revelation. Naruto stared. What? If you keep using it while I'm trying to undo the damage, Kurama said, you will only make the damage worse faster than I can heal it. His voice dropped lower. If you continue the way you have been, you will go blind. Naruto looked down. Everything in his life seemed to demand more power, more speed, more force. And now the one weapon he had come to rely on most was the one thing he could not touch. Kurama watched him quietly. For once, there was no mockery in his expression. No irritation. Only the hard, ugly honesty Naruto had asked for. Naruto swallowed once. If I stop using it now. Kurama answered at once. Then I can fix this. Naruto's hands curled into fists at his sides. And if I don't? Kurama did not soften it. Then one day you'll open your eyes and there will be nothing left to see. The words hit straight through every defense Naruto had left. Nothing left to see. Not the sky. Not his parents. Not Mito. Not Colin. He shut his eyes hard for a moment, breathing through the sudden pressure in his chest. When he opened them again, there was anger there, yes, but underneath it was fear. Real fear. The kind he almost never let himself feel. I can't, he started, then stopped. Kurama waited. Naruto looked away and forced the words out anyway. I can't lose that. Kurama said nothing. Naruto laughed once under his breath, bitter and unsteady. I can deal with a lot, he muttered. Pain. Enemies. Getting beat half to death. Fine. He looked back up. But I can't go blind, Kurama. The fox's gaze stayed on him. Then don't. Naruto stared at him. Kurama's tail shifted in the darkness behind him. Stop using the Mangekyo. Let me heal what you've already damaged. Fight with something else. His eyes narrowed. You have more than one kind of strength, brat. Start acting like it. Naruto looked down again, silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right. The answer came out quiet, but real. Kurama studied him for another second, then gave a small, rumbling grunt that might have been approval. Good. Back in the real world, Naruto was still standing in the service station, one fist resting against the dented wall, his breathing gradually evening out. The lights above him no longer blurred. But now that he knew what was happening, every flicker of strain felt different. Sharper. More dangerous. Naruto lowered his hand from the wall and stared at nothing for a moment. Then, very softly, to the empty station. I'm not losing my sight. Because if he did, if he let this keep going until there was nothing left, then one day he wouldn't be able to see Colin smile at him again. And that thought terrified him more than any battlefield ever had.